would like to call this November 6, 2018 study session to order at approximately 7:30. Okay, roll call. Ruth Ann?
Member Carter?
Here.
Member Hall?
Here.
Member Patton?
Here.
Member Fisher is here. Vice President Rollins?
Here.
Day.
Okay, additions, corrections, and modifications. Don, are there any additions?
No.
Corrections, okay. So we get now to the citizen statements. So if those of you that want to speak needs to pick up a goldenrod sheet and give it to, is Lori back there, to Lori. So right now, I have Cindy Zarback, and then after her will be Katrina Rogers. And any more, just bring them up. Give them to Lori, and she'll bring them up.
Thank you.
Okay, take your time.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Cindy Zarbuck, and I have worked at Urbana Middle School for 15 years as a secretary there. And I guess the reason I'm here is to kind of beat the dead horse and to let you know that this isn't going away. It's kind of hard to hear the, I'm sorry, things could have been rolled out differently, because that's not really helping us. We need you in our building, physically seeing and hearing the abuse and disrespect that the students and the staff are dealing with every day. We need you in our building to help fix these, to help with solutions to fix what is now broken. Urbana Middle School is not a positive place for learning or working at this point. All the doors to the main office are locked except for the front door and the mailroom door, and that's for staff safety. We need you in our building, covering our classrooms. We can't get substitutes, and it's just a snowball effect. I'm in charge of the subs in the morning, and I am sending out emails asking other teachers to cover classrooms during their free time because we don't have coverage. It just creates more chaos for a building that's already in crisis. I think we need you in the trenches and to actually be at the middle school to see what's going on. Because unless you walk in those halls during the day, I try not to go out when the students are passing. It doesn't feel safe, and the students are roaming freely around the building. You know, everybody that's been hired, I think, is doing a good job, and they're doing the best to their ability. But something else has to be done. And I don't know what it is, but I think you need to come and be in the building. I invite anybody to come and sit in the office for one day and listen to the phone calls that we take from the classrooms and on the radios to actually hear what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Katrina Rogers. And then after Katrina will be Tracy Williams.
As of this moment right now, my student is no longer a middle school student. She's no longer in Urbana Middle School. But that's because of the verbal and the sexually verbal bullying towards her. Now she's in Reading. The bullying is still happening by Urbana Middle School students outside of Urbana Middle School. Urbana PD is not even doing anything about it. They said they have to catch him in the act. And this is getting ridiculous. I have a 14-year-old child who is constantly in a depressive state because of this bullying. And I honestly think if Urbana Middle School goes back through the records from when Woods was there and look at these students who were constantly getting referrals, suspensions, disciplinary actions, that they will see that there was some form of bullying other than physical bullying to make sure that these students are not continuously getting this bullying. I see it all over Facebook. Parents who are telling me that their sixth grader child is being sexually harassed verbally by other sixth grade students. This is ridiculous. I know when I was in Urbana High School, Cobb was there. We knew better than to do anything in those halls or in that school because Cobb was on our butts. I have mentioned it a couple of different times in some private meetings that maybe if there is more presence by the school resource officer, maybe an assembly done by the school resource officer, so these students know that this officer is supposed to be there to help them, but also to help keep them safe, would be a good idea. But I honestly think as a town, Urbana needs to start combining together because this is ridiculous. My student went from being constantly bullied for the first 2 weeks of her life in Urbana Middle School, 8th grade, and sometimes physically bullied. She was smacked in the face by a student at her bus stop, and all there was done was restorative practices. The student is still one of them that is physically or verbally attacking her, and it's because he lives in my neighborhood. But this is ridiculous. These students think that they can verbally, sexually, emotionally bully these students, and it's not being seen until these students start to physically lash out. There is one student that I know of personally who is afraid to go to school. DCFS has taken her into this school several times because she's afraid to go to school because they're picking at her physical scars. And this is what we're dealing with. This is why we're seeing these children lash out the way they are. And if we as parents, community administrators, start acknowledging that this is something that's going on in this school and start taking attention to, okay, why are they doing these negative behaviors? And start narrowing it down, it'd be a lot better. I ain't going to say my child is approved 100%, no. Because she still has this bullying in her face outside of the school, even though she's no longer an Urbana Middle School student. She had high hopes of going back to Urbana Middle School after being at Ready and going through everything. And now she's at the point she just wants to stay at Ready. And that's ridiculous. She's at the point now that she doesn't even feel like she can be around her friends in a school environment because everybody else is trying to make it worse. And the other part that makes it the terrible part is nobody knows why these students are bullying what they're bullying. We still to this day cannot figure out why the 3 that are bullying my child outside of school is doing so, because they refuse to admit that it's what they're doing. And I honestly believe, I can't say that everybody will agree with me, but I honestly believe if you look through the history, especially my child, of why she was suspended or disciplinary, 90% of the time it was because she was being bullied and it was being ignored. And I'm not going to sit here and say that my child's a perfect one because she's not. I'll admit that in a heartbeat. But because she was being bullied and she lashed out, and it was acknowledged this time that she was being bullied. That's why she didn't get expelled and was just placed. She's doing a lot better in school. Grades are straight A's across the board. Yes, we have some behavior issues, but that's because she's still being bullied. And me as a parent, I'm taking action on that. I was just at Urbana PD yesterday morning. And this is where, as parents, administrators, and everything, we need to look at what this is causing these students to backlash like this. What is causing them to lash out at their bullies like this? I just don't understand how we've let it get this far. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lori, do I have some more? Tracy Williams, so after Tracy. Okay, Amy LT. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Tracy Williams, special ed teacher at Urbana Middle School. I've been there going on 8 years. I'm here tonight because I'm very concerned about what's going on at the schools. The level of disrespect, the fear that staff has, the fear that students have, it's prevalent. It's on the minds. They talk about it. To me, the students do. I teach special ed, so I have to monitor my students. I have extreme fear for them sometimes in the hallway when there's a big group of students out in the hallway and they're like yelling at staff, screaming at staff, calling them names. Today, I asked the student not to look in the social studies room. She was in the doorway and she was making figures in the door, disrupting the class. I asked her not to. She called me a bitch, told me to go back in my class, told me I was a fucking hoe and I had no right to speak to her. And this is just common all day long. Threatens. I know a teacher that was threatened that if she didn't give a student a piece of pizza and he'd already stolen one piece, that he was going to smack her in the face. She asked that to be addressed, and you could see just kind of on the faces of the people that work in the hallway, they're just like, they don't know what to do. There's not like a clear path of what we're supposed to do with this program. They come into team meetings, they don't know how to fill out paperwork because they don't have direction on how to fill out the tier paperwork. They don't know what they're supposed to really do to help the students. I was part of that brainstorming crew when we got together and we were like brainstorming what can we do, because we all recognize there is a problem. And so what can we do? We know we got to get social work in here. We have to get some more support for the students. And I was part of that group that did that. So my understanding was that this was designed to support students, to get into classroom and support teachers. That's where the breakdown is, right? We want the kids in there, we want them learning. But if you come over to the school, at least in 8th grade land and in 7th grade land, I don't go to 6 too often, there's at least 15 kids in the hallway. Some of them don't go to any class. 2 of them are my preschool students that I taught in preschool. Do you know what that does to me? To see these kids, I taught them at a risk program in preschool, and now in 8th grade, they're just wandering the halls all day, not going to class. What kind of education are we giving them? And these are students of color. This is why this program was mostly designed for. We're talking 15 kids. A lot of times don't go to any class all day long. What are we doing? Are we serving them? No, absolutely not. And we're not pushing into classrooms, not supporting the teachers in the classroom and supporting the students where the breakdown is, where the relationships have to be repaired so that these students can be educated. We are in the 2nd quarter of this year and this is still going on. And so I have a student who was talking with some of the other students that are doing this, skipping every class. So he decided he wanted to try it. So when he did it, I went and found him. And he said to me, they're doing it. They're getting away with it. Why did you come find me? And I said, because I care about you. And because I believe in you. What are we saying to these students who are sitting in that hallway and we don't speak to them? What are we saying to them? We're saying we don't care and we don't believe in them. I don't agree with that. Something has to be done. If we set this up to help these kids, then we need to step back, we need to reevaluate it, which should have been in the plan at the very beginning, an evaluation timeline. And we need to look at it and we need to fix it. Because we're not serving these kids. And I cannot sit there as an educator, as an advocate for kids, and just let this go. So I'm sitting here, and I'm talking to each one of you, and I'm saying something has to happen. It has to change. We're not serving them. And we definitely aren't educating them. And we're not giving them a chance to a good future. We're telling them they don't matter by ignoring them. So please, please do something. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amy Felty, and behind her will be Michael Felty.
Thank you.
Hi.
Am I right that community people can come visit the schools? We just come and check in the office? And,
That's my
Okay.
understanding, yeah.
okay, thanks. I realize this is really difficult, and that the examining an educational system that isn't equal for all students isn't easy, and it's fraught with problems. And I know that change is hard in our country because the systems have gotten out of hand, and the policies and practices. When I read educational reports across the country and the school report cards and things, I see that the problems of graduation rates, of abilities taught and things, that is, of students making benchmarks are a problem. As a teacher myself, I don't know whether the benchmarks we have contribute to the problem or not, because I know that in the last 20 years they've changed curriculum to meet benchmarks. So things that are taught are different than the things that I taught when I started teaching actually 30 years ago. And I know that Urbana has started on this path of looking for better practices based on the data that you've gathered, and I think that's commendable, and I think it's brave. Unfortunately, there is pushback, there's grievance, and that's all part of this process too. I'm reminded of a saying that a woman in town told me recently, as she was a black woman, as she was studying what should happen here, and she said, remember, Amy, that for people accustomed to privilege, and that's all of us who are white in this case, equity or equality seems like oppression. So as we look for things to do to change in ourselves and in the systems that we have created, it feels bad to people who are finding that things are shifting. I have some suggestions, though. One is, in the community, and I live in Champaign, I'm hearing stories on the other side, too. I mean, I hear the stories tonight and similar ones. I have friends who are subs. But I don't hear in the paper, and I don't see in the circulation of the community and the clubs and things, and the meetings, I don't hear the things that are happening that are good, and yet I hear them from individuals. I know, for instance, that there are students who are reaching out to contact staff members in administration who are saying such and such is going to happen, can you help? And I know that those things are addressed, and then they don't erupt into problems. But I don't hear about those publicly. In the News Gazette, there was an article recently about fights. What was it, 5 fights in a day? Well, I know in Champaign there are fights, but those aren't in the paper. They did have in the paper about shootings that happened after a game at Central once, but it seems to me like the newspaper can cover other things as well. And I'd like to know what you're doing perhaps to encourage and help teachers change the curriculum to support this as well. Because in history and social sciences and psychology classes, in English, in the literature taught, I know that there are active ways and dynamics that can help students discuss things and raise levels of thinking. Safe spaces can be created for learning. When I taught in English, I often did a unit on Kohlberg's moral development scale. And that wasn't a moral development scale of morals as you're probably thinking, but it was at what reasoning do I have behind the decisions that I make. When students wrote about that unit later, they found that it had changed the way they viewed each other, and it viewed the way they made decisions. It sounds like you could probably do some curriculum support. Maybe you're already doing it. It'd be great to know about that. And I also am wondering if there's been a group of students in the high school and middle school who can be self-selected and representative of their classes, not selected by the adults in the building, but self-selected to be advisors to the board, to be conduits and say, well, here's what we're thinking, here's what we're seeing, here's what we're hoping, here's what we're afraid of, here's what we like, and so on. That maybe they could help put in place some more roles, some more changes, some more voices that would help you. I know that the Open Meetings Act is a difficulty, so you couldn't have 3 board members go and talk to a group of students. That's okay. I advocate that the Open Meeting Act is for a good purpose, and I'm hoping the board doesn't ever get itself into a bind with that in any way, because to break the spirit of the law or the principle of the law only sets things back. So I admire that you are working, and I know there are constraints. I'm wondering if you have considered some inspirational in-school field trips for students. I used to call in people from the community to come speak to my classes. We gather 2 or 3 classes in the library and have people come. I remember Jonathan Westfield spoke. Sean, whose last name I don't remember, was a city attorney in Champaign, and she came in and spoke about curfew and different things before prom nights. I had Cypress Hughes come and talk to the kids. He was a counselor at Parkland, and he was able to stay and answer questions for students that whole day about choices and things. And several students wrote after that and commented to me that this also had changed their path, to give them a different way of thinking of how to use school to go forward. And the last thing is I've recently attended a training called Crossroads, Dismantling Systemic Racism. It's a 2.5-day training put on by the national organization. And Springfield, Illinois offers the trainings. Another 6 people attended one just 2 or 3 weeks ago in Springfield. So there are now 8 of us in the cities of Champaign and Urbana who've been through this systematic training on how to recognize the pieces that go along with changing prejudiced systems, whether it's against race or women or minorities of any kind. And you can look at the pieces and say, oh, I didn't realize this was a part of it, to move from this step to this step, and there's 6 steps across. Crossroads gives guidance in that. They have a 1-day training they'll do for groups that are especially for education, as well as trainings for cultural and community people, besides the 2.5-day training. So if that information would be helpful, I'm happy to give that information. The only other thing I can say is repeat Dr. King's statement that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it does bend toward justice. And I admire what you're doing. I'm sorry it's fraught with as much disunity as it is, but I hope you'll all stick together, and in doing so show the community that we can stick together with you too in this. Thank you for your work with the kids.
Thank you. Okay, Michael Felty, and behind him, Tracy Barton.
I'm not as polished a public speaker as my wife is, but I do have some ideas on this topic of the commitment to racial equity. And I come from an educational family. My father was head of the counseling department at Central High School until 1976. My mother was a first grade teacher. My wife is an educator. I worked at the Computer-Based Education Research Laboratory for 20 years, and I've been vitally concerned with education most of my life. I hesitate to use the old metaphor because it's been misused, I think, about when you're up to your bottom in alligators. It's hard to remember that you're purpose was to drain the swamp. But I know that it's when people are in the trenches, when they're dealing with problems every day, it is hard to see what the point of doing these things, these new things, are. So that's what I want to address, this overall point of view. These days, when hate walks ever more boldly and proudly in this nation, even encouraged at the national level on an almost daily basis, it is vitally important that the heartland raise its voice and actions to challenge the status quo, which is the foundation and the strength of hate's campaign. And I want to quote Thomas Jefferson, although it's said that this is not a quote of Thomas Jefferson, but it could have been. If you want something you have never had, you have to do something you have never done. And that's what this effort is. It's doing something new to address these problems, and I support it very much.
And then behind her will be Carrie Brown. And if there's any more, please give your sheets to Lori, please.
Good evening. I come tonight as a gravely concerned parent. I have a freshman boy and a 7th grade girl. I could be here for the UMS report card that shows that the school on the whole is underperforming. I could be here for the daily violence in the school, the unsafe atmosphere for our students and for our staff. I could be here because my daughter just cries in the evenings, as she's really not a crier as much as it might seem as she might have gotten that from me. She cries because she really just wants to learn, and she's sitting through full classes while she's listening to teachers just reprimand students for the entire class period. And she comes home and she knows she's not learning anything. And that makes her feel really bad because she's a bright girl. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because guns were found in the school last Friday, and the police were not notified at the time. Guns were found in the school last Friday, and the school was not locked down. I'd like to know why. Why weren't the police called? Why wasn't the entire school searched for the possibility of additional guns? Is it really that far? We hear over and over and over from our staff, from our students, unfortunately from the newspaper, because they're catching word of what we know is going on every single day. We're hearing this is a toxic, hostile environment. There's so many bad feelings in that environment. Is it too crazy to think that this could be our community with the next school shooting? It's not. When people feel trapped, bad things happen. When people feel like they don't have their concerns listened to and addressed by the adults in the room, bad things happen. And if we don't think that this wasn't a test of guns being brought into the school and not being responded to in a swift way, we need to rethink. Guns were brought in, there was not a lockdown, there was not a search, the police were not notified, the teachers were not notified until 8 o'clock that night. The parents got an email. My daughter has not heard squat about this from anyone at the school. The only reason she knows anything about this is because she's heard me talking about it. That's unexcusable. Why are kids not hearing that it is absolutely not okay to bring guns to school? What to do in the instance of a gun in the school? What to do if they know that their student sitting next to them has guns in their bags? They have not been talked to about the seriousness of this. And it's not a boneheaded 12-year-old just not thinking about the consequences. Every single one of those kids in that school knows and should know it is not okay to bring a gun to school. And if they don't know, everybody that's there, the staff, the parents, the administrators, signs, why aren't there signs all over the school reminding kids we are maintaining a safe environment? This is what is not allowed. This is what's going to happen if this happens. The consequences should be spelled out crystal clear, and swift action should be taken. Now the kids are hearing guns were brought into the school on Friday. Nothing has been done other than that that student's been removed. That's great. That one offender has been removed from the school. I'm glad that that's been addressed. How many other kids are looking at that and realizing the police weren't involved and it took days to address this? It's not okay. I don't want to see what's going to happen next. I think there should be a school program. I think there should be signage. I think this should be on the announcements. Those kids should be hearing over and over and over, this is absolutely unacceptable and this school will not accept it. The police won't accept it. The community won't accept it. This is terrifying to me, and I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. That's not what this is. This was a test with guns in our schools that was not addressed properly. The last thing I'll say is I know from talking to parents that I'm in touch with that some kids had heard about a rumor about a potential shooting at lunch last Friday. And as the parents started talking, we realized more and more kids had heard this rumor. And many of those kids had not talked to their teachers. They did not notify the office. It was just at the kid level that this rumor was being spread. It was just a rumor. Obviously, nothing happened. But I think our kids, because of this toxic, hostile environment, they are terrified of snitching, of telling on their peers. They're afraid of the ramifications. And we hear from parents of kids getting beat up on the way home without anything spurring that. I know my kid is terrified to look at certain kids the wrong way. They don't want to be caught. They don't want to see anything. They don't want to know anything. And if they do, they're keeping it to themselves. That's not okay, because when something is going to happen, you want those kids, if they get any word at all, to go to people that they trust. And what this really says is they don't feel like the grown-ups at the school are able to do their job or are doing their job or are willing to do the job. They don't trust that there is a safety net there. It's not okay. Thank you.
Carrie Brown and then Dena Brown will follow.
Hello, everyone. I come here as a friend. I've been really encouraged to see so many people. And I taught at Urbana Middle School for several years. I have a lot of friends and people that I respect here in this crowd, people who have different opinions on this discipline, the way things have happened. And I just want to say that right out, I'm very proud of our community. I am so proud of our school district. And I feel that I'm just, the amount of respect and love I think that is coming out is really powerful. And I know it might not feel that way because I think our emotions are very strong and we're talking about our children and I think a lot of us on both sides feel that that our kids aren't safe. And so with that, I want to say I'm coming here, one, I have taught at Urbana Middle School for several years. Before that, I worked at 100% free and reduced lunch school down in Orlando. It was downtown. It was 100% students who are minority. 50% of our students spoke Haitian Creole. And we had a lot of these same experiences. We had teachers who had bullet holes in their cars. And we were dealing with violence on a pretty massive level. But I will say that our school took a very holistic approach where we saw the child as a whole child, and we attempted to take care of issues that a lot of these children were dealing with. We dealt with homelessness. We had a club for kids who were dealing with homelessness or insecure housing situations. We also had a club for kids who had a parent in prison. We made resources for everything they needed. We had a free food store, free clothing store, and it was all community resourced. And I will say that we had a huge impact on these children because we were taking care of holistically their needs. I want to say that a lot of our students are struggling with poverty. A lot of our students are struggling with trauma. And when kids, especially kids who don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, a lot of times what ends up happening is violent actions. If you've ever raised a 2-year-old, you'll see some of this. If they don't get something that they think is right, they often will have like a violent response, throwing something, hitting, things like this. And I think that it's important for us to understand that we're talking about children, and that we need to address these issues in a way that we can help them. Lots of kids have grown up in violent homes, and they don't become violent because they've had love and care in their lives. And I want to say that we can do that. I want to say, as a part of a project that I did, we were partnering with Harvard University to do a study with my 6th grade students down in Orlando. And part of that project was giving power to students. So this may sound a little counterintuitive, but a lot of the kids, when they're dealing with trauma and poverty, they go home and they're adults. They're making meals for their brothers and sisters. They're planning things for their family. I remember as a kid growing up in a poor family, I organized my mom's bills and made sure that she got them paid. And so we have to understand that when a person goes home and is expected to be an adult, and then they come to a school and they have absolutely no power, it doesn't register. And again, with kids who don't have a prefrontal cortex, a lot of times that comes out in violence and ways of taking power in any way that they can. It's important for us. I love that somebody brought up the idea that we need to have kids a part of our democracy as a part of our community. I think that you might see some really impressive things. I know that we did. I know that our school, not only did we see a huge reduction in violence, we also saw scores jump. We had kids who were performing in 2nd and 3rd grade levels jump to 5th and 6th grade levels, so making huge grade jumps is right when Common Core was being implemented. As you know, there was like a huge drama with that, and scores were not looking good because of the way that it was, the way that we had done the math on it. But our kids were doing amazing things. Arnie Duncan came and visited our school because of the things that were happening there. And so I just want to give like a glimmer of hope. There are things that people have done in actual 100% poverty. We had 30% of our students had a parent in prison. And so when you think about the things that we were seeing, we were able to make huge strides. And so I just want to say, given the things that you've done, I want to encourage you not to pull back, but lean in. I think there's more that needs to happen, more holistic care for our students. I also want to say, as someone who was a previous teacher, we also need to care for our teachers. I think that in a lot of ways they might not have been fully resourced, but they are also people, as well as our students. And I can tell you there were many nights that I lost sleep hearing the stories that I heard from my students, when I would think that a student was homeless because they all of a sudden started wearing the same clothes. These are traumas that our teachers are also going through. And in Urbana, if you work with the police department or the fire department, you are provided free mental health care. I think that needs to be provided for our teachers as well. I want to say, in my time working at the middle school, things were violent there too. Things were violent then too. I personally have received 2 black eyes from fights that had happened in the hallway. So, and this is before the deans were removed. So I want to say that a long picture, there's a lot of this that has been going and kind of crescendoing for a while. And so I want us to kind of take a step back and as adults in the room, think of how we can solve with love and respect for our students, love, respect for our parents and the cares that they have, the fears that they have, and love and respect for our teachers and their expertise and the things that they need to do a good job. Yep, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Next is Ms. Burnett, and then Malaya Smith.
Hi, everyone. I will. My name is Dena Brown. I have my notes on my phone because, technology. I'm a school counseling intern as well as a student engagement advocate at the high school, and I was an intern at the middle school last year. So I know there's a lot of rain that has been talked about today, so I just want to bring a little rainbow into it and let you guys know the good things that are happening at the high school, because there are a lot of good things that are happening at the high school. You're welcome. So a lot of things that I've been hearing over time, this is my first time at one of these meetings, but a lot of things that I watch them on TV, and the things that I've been hearing over time is how we have new interventions and supports, but not a lot is coming from that. They're not very fruitful. And I just want to say, as someone who is a part of those new interventions and supports, there are a lot of things that are happening that are great. So like some of the things that are happening are, there are SEAs at the high school that are going into the classrooms and having those social emotional learning talks with the students and classes that have had issues throughout the school year, because teachers are inviting the SEAs to do those type of things and have those type of talks and discussions with the students. There are circles that are happening not only amongst students, but amongst teachers and students to build relationships and build rapport with the students and the teachers that are facilitated by SEAs and clinical professionals and student interventionists. Students have told me personally that they do feel like their voices are being heard in a lot of instances. Of course, there are some cases where students may not feel that way, but me personally, they have came to me and said those things. A lot of the students are actually requesting help instead of just trying to figure out things on their own. A lot of students actually come to me on a daily basis asking for different types of help, asking for math help. And then I can refer them to a math tutor that comes 3 times a week, because we have those services and that they are being utilized. Other things that I want to talk about, there were a lot of suggestions on things that we can do, and a lot of them were really great. And they're actually suggestions that are happening within the building. So I know previously there was a suggestion about bringing community members in and talking about their careers. One of the amazing school counselors at the high school actually has a career program where at least once a week there's an outside person in their career coming into the school and talking to the students about that type of job. We've had teachers, chefs, we've had the chief of police come, like we had counselors come that were outside of the high school, because nobody wants to listen to the counselors all day in the high school. So we've had a lot, and if anybody knows any other people that would like to come to the high school, we're very open to that, because we're having them for the rest of the year. So the students are getting to see outside opportunities that a lot of other students at other schools may not have. So I'm really grateful that one of our counselors took the head on that and put that together for our students. Sorry. But I just, and another thing, getting through to the students means that you have to build rapport with them. And if you don't have a rapport with the students, then they're not going to listen to you. So some types of things that I've noticed at the high school to build rapport with the students are like open gyms. We had an open gym where the principal was actually playing basketball with some of the students. Now you can say, oh, I played basketball with Ms. Brown, like she's super cool. That's how you start to build rapport with the students, right? Because then they'll like you more, they'll get that you're trying to understand them in their habitats, not just coming into the office, but actually meeting them on the court, like, and having music and having snacks. Those are the type of things that are happening at the high school, but we don't hear about those because those are the good things that are happening. And echoing what another person said, there's so much concern about our students. Like, that's what we're here for, the students. Everybody wants the students at the high school to succeed. And everybody, I hear like a lot of community members, but we have to think internally, have we done anything to help these students succeed? Or have we just complained about the things that we're hearing? Because I don't know about anyone else, but if someone came up to me and was like, oh, I would love to come into the school and to do this for your students and to teach them this and to provide them with these opportunities, I'm sure the door won't be closed in their face. So I know there is a lot of complaints, but we need to look and reflect on ourselves. What are we doing to help the students personally, and not just what are we requesting because a lot can happen if you put your feet to the ground and get moving. Thank you.
All right, the next person.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I am very happy to be here. My name is, oh, let me speak in here. Okay. My name is Malaya Smith, and I am a student engagement advocate at Urbana Middle School, and I specifically work with my sixth graders. So let me tell you a little bit about me before I go deep into the work that we do. So first off, I am a recent graduate from Eastern Illinois University, and I got my bachelor's in psychology, May 2016, and I have my master's in clinical mental health counseling, and I'm a certified clinical therapist. So I am very qualified for this position. So my role in this school is to provide social emotional support to our students, create programs, lessons, goal settings, activities, groups, immediate clinical techniques that are adapted from various forms of therapy. I also provide support to help regulate misunderstandings between students and staff. I regularly do meditation and mindfulness as a holistic healing form for my students. We do play therapy, conflict management, where we are learning assertiveness training skills and also learning how to express ourselves. I am also a presenter for PD Cadre Leadership Team, where I am encouraging racial equity. I collaborate with the 8th grade advisory class, where I am implementing social emotional learning to our students, and I'm just across the board helping and supporting everybody at my school. So the middle school period for our students, this is a very concrete operational stage for them according to Piaget. So they're going from a very egocentrical mindset to more of an abstract form of thinking. So at this moment, guys, they're very argumentative. It's very developmentally appropriate. However, as our students of color, they are dealing with a lot of other traumas and pain due to systematic oppression and dealing with constant racism on a daily basis, and they have a preconceived place in this society based on that. So we are automatically seen as criminals, unintelligent, and derogatory according to the media. So many of us feel hopeless in this society, and we feel like we don't have any power. My graduate research and experience, I learned that our students of color, we are dealing with deep layers of trauma, anxiety, depression, internalized self-hate, and many other things that are not addressed based on the system that is designed for us to fail. So many of us, we show our emotions through anger, even when we're hurt and we're sad. Anger is an extremely common cover-up emotion because in our society, we are taught not to feel. I think it's very common. So I think it's very important to allow our students to have a safe place to manage conflict, express themselves, and to have self-awareness and find internal love before they get to the place of blowing up. Let me get my notes together. Okay. The concept of rebuilding a system of love, support, and guidance is valuable for our students, all of our students' growth and our education. In correlation with opening up the doors for racial equity and acknowledging the elephant in the room, it takes time to break down a system that is already broken and to rebuild it. It takes a lot of time. However, any form of change comes with challenge and healing, and this takes pain, energy, and of course, time. But being in the school, I can see the changes in the students firsthand from day one until now. I'm seeing students, they're requesting for conflict circles, meditation groups, asking for support. They're taking feedback in way more openly. Students are saying they don't get in trouble as much at home, and they're better able to identify their triggers, which a lot of us can't even do, which is really, really cool. Each student, they're unique, and they all deserve to have a chance to make mistakes and to find themselves. I believe in racial equity because my firsthand experience being a double minority. I'm Black and I'm a woman. So I can empathize with students whose reactions, attitudes, and responses are condemned in this society without understanding where it came from and why, because I can see myself in many of them. I feel that I can help, and we all can help, to encourage positive change to improve the well-being of a lot of our children that fall in the cracks of this system. Being able to model something different, which can have such a life-changing impact on their futures. According to Jones 2006, Black teachers and support staff in the educational setting is so important for our students. It helps with their success, and it helps for them to feel included and having that inclusive feeling. So I am very thankful for being in this district. I believe in racial equity. It's more than a t-shirt. It's a slogan or a resolution. It's who we are, and most importantly, in the ways in which we actively engage in this world around us to dismantle the system of racial oppression. So thank you guys so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Okay, then I have Linda Minor, and then after her will be Melina Thompson. And I think I have some more coming up. So those two, and then I'll have some other ones. You can start whenever.
Thank you. I just want to say everything that she said, I would love to also see provided to our staff and our teachers. So thank you for all of your. And I thank the board. I want to take this time to thank the board because I know you've been working really hard and lots of long hours, and I just want to say that it's not going unnoticed, and we appreciate your volunteering to do this hard job. So for the last month, I've been listening a lot and observing and doing some reflection, and from what I understand, there's a lot of people who are interpreting the expressions of their struggles, people who we've heard come to this microphone in the past several months, last 6 months. They're interpreting their outcries as a resistance to restorative practices and racial equity. I just want to make it very clear. I support restorative practices, and I want to work for racial equity. So if you hear nothing else, please don't lose that in my message. Our teachers and our staff and some families have had a lot of experiences, and what I've been hearing are expressions of fear and confusion. When in a state of fear, one is just trying to survive and looking for ways to cope. So for those who have heard witnesses from this microphone as having no hope or being against restorative practices and racial equity, I feel it's because that fear has hijacked it. And a skilled leader would look through this fear and see that it's actually a cry for more supports. And I hope this sounds familiar because it's the same thing we are trying to provide to our most troubled students. We want to be trauma-informed in our procedures. We've heard that term a lot, trauma-informed. But it doesn't appear that we are providing the same for our teachers. This work is challenging even for the most skilled professionals. How can our teachers and staff hold our students when they themselves are not being held in the same way by their administrators, by the district? What I hear being resisted is the chaos and the endangerment and confusion due to the lack of planning and communication of systems and internal practices. Now, I realize that even the most well thought out agendas don't always go as planned. And that's when we step back and we reevaluate, we reassess, we increase supports, we increase our dialogue with those specific individuals that are struggling the most. We need a system that offers supports to make everyone feel safe so that we can move into change. Just like a toddler, before going to explore something new, looks back at mom to check in for reassurance that they are okay. Who is there for our teachers and staff to look back to for that reassurance? When you're on an airplane, no one questions why we, the adults, are trained to put on the oxygen mask to the adult first before assisting the child. It's because the adult has to be supported in order to support the child. Being trauma-informed includes safety, trustworthiness, and transparency. Peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and lastly, cultural and historical and gender issues. How is our district offering safety, trustworthiness, transparency, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, voice, choice, and being culturally, historically, and gender sensitive? Why aren't we taking care of our teachers and staff first? Our students' learning environment is only as good as the working conditions of our teachers. Thanks.
So after Ms. Thompson, it will be Tina, Warbley. Tina Rubry. Rubry. You may start.
Hi, my name is Melina Thompson. I'm going to keep this brief because I'm not good at public speaking. I am not good at public speaking, clearly. I am a speech-language pathologist at Urbana Middle School. Kind of going off of what the previous speaker said, I am for racial equity. I'm a black woman. I'm for racial equity. But I think we need to make a distinction between what's happening at Urbana Middle School and racial equity. You can be for one and not be for the other. I am for racial equity. I am not for a hastily put together plan tossed in the laps of people who are unprepared to deal with this. This is bigger, the problem is bigger, and what is happening is bigger than the people who were put in charge to deal with this can handle. It was a African-American boy who I witnessed have his head stomped in. It was a Latina girl who got her blood cleaned off of a locker. This is not about racial equity. This is about the safety of children. First and foremost, our primary goal needs to be the safety of every child that walks in our school. And then it needs to be the education of those children. We are not doing either. We are failing in both aspects. And that has nothing to do with racial equity. That has to do with what the administration is doing and how they are handling this situation. This is not an issue of racial equity. This is an issue of safety. I can go into being called a bitch for walking down a hallway. I can go into being threatened by students for telling them no. But I'm going to keep it focused on the children. I work with a very diverse group of kids as a speech-language pathologist, and it is every child in my room that is frightened about what is happening in the hallway. It is children of every creed and every color and every gender that tells me that they are frightened that someone's going to come through the door, that tells me they are frightened that the screaming sounds like there is a monster on the other side of the wall, because there are kids just milling in the hallways and nothing is being done. This is not about racial equity. This is about safety. And I encourage any parent or anyone else that has not been in that room or been in that school to come and find out what is going on. Because before you decide that teachers are not for their students or are not for racial equity, come and look at what's going on. Because I come to that school every day. And I am there for those kids. Because I would not be there for the pay, and I would not be there for any other reason. I am there for those kids. And so is everybody else who comes in there. And they are for racial equity. But this is not what we are talking about. We are talking about safety. And I am speaking today terrified and hating to be in front of people because something needs to be done for these children, every single one of them. Their safety is at stake. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so Tina, and then behind Tina is Fatisha Pettigrew.
Hi, thank you. My name is Tina Hubry, and so I'm perpetually mind-boggled by all the conversations that are being turned into one conversation. And it makes it really difficult to have an intellectual conversation or dialogue about the situations that are happening because so many people are combining a whole bunch of things that need to be kind of pulled apart. And so while all these situations are definitely intertwined, it needs to be acknowledged that they're not all cause-effect relationship situations. And there needs to be a better critical analysis of the situations that are happening. So, for example, I would not sit up here and say that the behavior from the students is acceptable in any way. Not all the students, but a lot of what's going on. People are talking about it. The woman who was just up here before me talking about what's going on in the hallways, this stuff is real. And kids are absolutely acting out. Lots of kids are acting out. The first parent who spoke tonight talking about bullying and not knowing why it's happening and that it's just ruthless and it leaves the building. This is all very true and it's all happening. And it's really sad to see our youth struggling in such a way that they are acting out of control in so many situations. So I would never deny that, and I would never say that that's not a problem that we need to discuss. In fact, I would say that is what we should be discussing. And the problem is that I see the conversations start to become intertwined such that we're spending so much time and energy talking about or damning the way that things have happened, or the way that procedures have or have not happened, or the way that decisions have or have not been made, that we are wasting time and energy that could be going towards our kids. And with the amount of outcry that our kids have right now, I'm sad that it's not their outcry that we're discussing, it's often our own. And this is not to say that teachers don't care about their students. And part of the problem is that as soon as somebody comes or says something in regards to one thing, then people bring it into all the other conversations. So as soon as I say something might be about racial equity and that we need to look at our white privilege and we need to look at the systemic racism and we need to look at the inherent deficit thinking that our teachers might be coming from, me included, as a white individual, that is not saying that our teachers all don't care about our students. See, and the problem is that I see people putting all that together. And so as soon as I have a conversation with somebody about racial equity or about restorative practices, there comes this protective, defensive response that disengages from the conversation that we're trying to have, and it becomes a conversation about something that's pulling our energy away from what we need to do. The backlash and the bullying and the toxic environment is horrific. I work at the middle school. It's horrifying. And it is not just the students. I sit up here knowing already what's been said about my position on things through Facebook, through text messages, in the halls, conversations between other teachers. I overhear things. I see your snarled remarks and your snarled looks. I feel and hear the murmurs when I talk about racial justice. I see people roll their eyes at professional development meetings. I see people disengage from the conversation. In fact, last year, before I knew that this was the projection we were going, I sat in many professional development meetings about restorative practices and was floored by the disengagement of some of our, not all and not most, but some of our teachers during these conversations. Now look, I'm not here to bash teachers, okay? I'm here to say that we hold so much of this in our hands. And I am very, very disappointed that the board has not held us more accountable. I am very disappointed that you all have engaged in this amount of conversation and spent this much energy talking about what our administration at the central office level has done or hasn't done, and not examined what has been going on in our walls. We keep pointing fingers, we keep blaming people, and we're not having that full conversation. I don't think blame is really a good, productive use of our time. But if we're going to be playing the blame game, I think we need to throw everybody into that mesh. And it's all gone for me anyways. Reputation's out the window, that's fine with me. The people who I respect and the people who I trust and look up to, the people who I work for, who are my kids, they look up to me. We can have candid conversations. But I am really, really sick and tired of the negativity in our halls at the middle school. Every time one thing happens, every time any fight happens, it becomes, look at what happened now. See, we knew this wasn't going to work. See, we knew we needed this, that, or the other thing. I told you this wasn't going to work. I'll tell you what, you want to talk about blame? I kind of blame people for not giving this a chance, the fact that we got kids walking in the halls. It's insane the amount of kids who sometimes don't go to class. And kids who call me names in the hallways. And I don't know what to do either. But you know what? Shame on you for not helping us figure out what to do about that and providing us with the resources and the time and energy to figure out how to deal with kids. My husband works for a company who gives food service to fraternities and sororities on campus. He just told me a story about how their fraternity brothers just came in and ripped open the refrigerator and left it open and spoiled thousands of dollars of food and trashed the kitchen, and they had to have penalties. These are college kids, right? People can break all sorts of norms. So we need to stop playing this whole this is why, this is why. We need to really crack down and do what we're going to do. If you look at the self-fulfilling prophecy, it starts with our actions. The impact is the other's beliefs. But then the impact goes into others' actions, and that becomes a trickle effect into our beliefs, which then goes back to the beginning into our actions. And if our kids know, and they know, how so many adults feel about them, how so many people look at them, and our kids of color already are experiencing this from day one in their lives. They are born into this world, into this white-run world with brown or black skin. I had 6th graders last year tell me about elementary teachers who called them the N-word when she was in 4th grade. I don't even know that was in this district, right? I'm not trying, but this is what our kids are experiencing. So you want to ask questions what our kids need? They need us to get our heads out of the clouds. And we really need to recognize what's going on. And we need to get over our egos. We need to get over ourselves. And we need to say, yeah, I do have racist tendencies. Yeah, I do have racist thoughts. Yeah, I do think twice when I get into an elevator next to a black man. You know what? That's what was put into my head as a child and as an adult. What am I going to do from there? That's the conversation I have with my kids. It's not about you're bad for having the judgmental thoughts. It's what are you going to do with that judgmental thought? And I just want to finish and say, well, I'm going to say two things. One, this whole dismantling public education and implementing restorative justice and restorative practices, man, we are on the cutting edge. There are so many scholarly articles out there. I just was at a thing with Brown University, or I can't even remember. It was like a webinar thing, and it was hosted by the AMLE and the whatever. Anyways, and it's people are talking about this. There's webcasts, there's professional national organizations who are talking about all this, and we're doing this. It's tough and it's hard, but we're doing it. And I think we really need to stop having these conversations and really start doing it. Okay, so the final thing I want to say is that we have talked time and time again, and I've heard so many people talk about transparency in communication, transparency in communication. I want to ask about transparency from the board. I want the board to be more transparent and more communicative with the public about audits that might not be doing. I want to know what is going on behind closed doors. I want to know why my fellow coworkers feel like they're under scrutiny, why I have coworkers who feel the need to say out loud, I am qualified for my position. Why have I had conversations with fellow coworkers who have said they've gotten calls about qualifications and certifications that they've already submitted to the district? I'm not sure what's going on, but there's a whole lot of rumors, and they're ugly, and I was already mad. And now I'm hearing about people being audited without any sort of potential rhyme or reason. I'm hearing people talk about something called a blacklist or a minority report, and I asked them why it's called that, and they said because it's people who are being looked into, whose certifications are being checked because we don't know why, but who's on that list. Now, I don't know, but this is the rumors, and I've heard it from more than one person in more than one area. So when I start hearing things from pockets and pockets of people, I start to become really concerned. So maybe you guys should figure out what those rumors are and address that, because that is going to give a really bad reputation. And if we're concerned about reputation, as the president of the board talked about on October 2nd, I think that you all have a lot of work to do as well. And I would really like to see you hold up your end of the bargain and make sure that you're holding each other accountable as well as the teachers accountable, because we answer to you officially, right?
Hi again. So every opportunity that I have to get in front of you guys, I will. So my name is Patricia Pettigrew. I have students in the district. I'm a proud graduate of Urbana High School, class of 1998. Ooh, ooh. But Urbana, we failed, okay? And as I sit back here and listen to all the teachers that have come here tonight and talk about their safety and their fear of their safety and how our kids are talking to them, I'm upset. Like, I want to scream and yell and punch things. And I know my frontal lobe is fully developed, so what's up with that? But I do remember a conversation that I had with the Urbana Middle School principal when I was asking about the disparities in discipline, and he told me straight up that not all of his staff is on board for the discipline procedures. And I know at where I work, if I don't follow the policies and procedures that are in place, I'm put on something that's called an action plan that specifically says you will follow these steps. Now, I'm the boss, so I do that to my staff. But if they don't follow those steps, they don't work there anymore. So if we've chosen as a district that we're taking these steps, then that's what we need to do. Now, I recognize that the teachers are asking for support, and that takes money, and we don't have that. So parents, what are we willing to do? How many hours can you spend at the school each week? Not just with your student, but just with students. I know when I walk in the Urbana Middle School, those kids know me. The staff doesn't tell me what's going on or where my kid is. The other students do. So I know I was just in front of you guys a couple of days ago. I am thinking about this daily. My kids are impacted. I have a 6th grader and an 8th grader at the middle school, and I have a kindergartner and a 1st grader. So I'm daily thinking about what needs to happen. So my shower thought this morning was, how many hours can parents devote to being at the school? And at this point in time, I don't even think that you need to specifically be doing anything. We need a parent presence at the school. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are there any more, Lori? Okay, we call for executive meeting session after current meeting. There is no call for an executive meeting after this one. So now I need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion passed. So, Don, we have some special guests in our audience. So you want to talk about them because they're very special.
Yes, I'm happy to. As you know, on November 11th, we celebrate Veterans Day in the United States. And Urbana School District is blessed with having a fairly large number of veterans who work to serve our students and families. We sent out a little Google poll the other day asking for anyone who wanted to be recognized to come, because we know that not everyone wants to have the spotlight. I'm very pleased to have 3 individuals here tonight for a couple of reasons. One is you've heard a lot about them at the board level when we talk about elementary PE. And so we have sorry, I stuck on a word there. I was going to say a force to be reckoned with, and I did not mean to make a pun, so I apologize. But I'd like to have the 3 of you stand up as I introduce you. First on our left, thank you. First on our left is Bobby Swantuck, who's an elementary PE teacher at Dr. Williams Elementary School, a veteran of the U.S. Army. Standing next to him is Bradley Benner, who's a PE teacher at Wiley Elementary School, also U.S. Army. And then we also have James Robert McCune, who's an elementary PE teacher at Leal and also the elementary PE coordinator, and he is U.S. Navy. So thank you very much. And Dolores Brown. Lloyd.
Lloyd.
Oh my goodness. Sorry. Dolores Lloyd. And Dolores Lloyd is principal of Thomas Paine, and you are Army National Guard. So I need a parent to stand up as well.
Yeah, we got a parent.
Yes. It just went out to staff.
But this is involved parent.
Yes, I will also introduce, and maybe we should have everyone who's a veteran please stand. But I will give a special shout out to Mrs. Ronnie Turner Winston. I got the order right, didn't I? Mrs. Ronnie Turner Winston, who is a PTA president at both, co-president at middle school and the high school, and she's also a moderator of the Facebook parent group and a member of several of our action teams. So.
Yes, and she's also a commander.
In Army National Guard?
Yeah, she's
American Legion.
Elected commander.
So could we give them one more round of applause, please? And gentlemen, thank you for coming, and I also thank you for listening to public comment, because I think it's important, and I appreciate your service, not just to this country, but to our students and families as well. As you know, Urbana, for a number of years now, at least the last 4 or 5, has opted to have school on Veterans Day and recognize veterans during the school day. And recognize the contribution of veterans, not just in service, in military service, but also in service to communities and families that they serve as well. So Sunday, November 11th is Veterans Day, recognized in the schools on November 12th, which is the formal observance. So thank you.
Okay, you want to go over the administrative briefings and reports?
Yes, I believe that this 8.1 is a board resolution. I believe that this is a board discussion. I'm not sure who is
probably me
leading this. Paul,
so
go ahead.
I just, after hearing public comment for so many weeks, there seemed to be a question from the public that the board has lost its resolve with regards to the goals behind racial equity. So several of us kind of started working on a draft resolution. This won't be voted on tonight. This is just a first read. The typical practice for the board is to discuss things in public once, to give the public a chance to give feedback back to the board before we vote on anything. And this is something like that. So I don't know if I should read it out loud, because I don't know if I ever had a copy.
Yeah, go ahead, read it. Go.
It's
I
a
want
little
to read it.
lengthy, so give me a moment.
People want to read along. I
Right.
think there are copies
But,
in the foyer.
whereas the equity mission of Urbana School District 116 states, we are a community devoted to dismantling inequitable practices so that all students reach their personal greatness, and success is no longer predictable by student identity, race, class, disability, language, religion, sexuality, gender, immigration status, among others. And whereas the results of the equity audit presented to the board on March 6, 2018 presented new district commitments to review policies, procedures, and structures through an equity lens, supply culturally responsive professional development, and aggressively recruit and retain staff with the goal of having the background of district staff match the background of the students it serves. And whereas it is a core belief of the Urbana community and of Urbana School District 116 that we as a district can only succeed if every student in the district has the supports they need to be successful. And whereas it is a long-standing practice of Urbana School District 116 to be a leader in implementing research-driven, best practice methods of improving student outcomes in line with the district's mission. And whereas the techniques in published research described broadly as restorative justice, restorative circles, trauma-informed care, increased social and emotional supports, have in exploratory studies indicated promising results in terms of their impact on school climate, student behavior, and relationships between students and with staff. Now, therefore, be it resolved, Section 1, the Board of Education of Urbana School District 116 affirms its commitment to the goals of racial equity articulated by the district's equity mission. And Section 2, the Board of Education supports the goals and commitments found in the equity audit of spring 2018, including but not limited to reviewing district policies, procedures, and structures through an equity lens, offering ongoing professional development on culturally responsive curriculum and instruction and culturally responsive management, and increasing our recruitment and retention efforts so our district faculty, staff, and administrators reflect the race and ethnicity of our student population. And Section 3, the Board of Education recognizes that the district's racial equity goals are most effectively attained through the strategic plan focus areas approved by the Board of Education in spring 2018, student academic achievement and instruction, district culture, administration, faculty and staff, and community and family relationships. Section 4, the resolution shall be in full force and effect forthwith upon its adoption. So that's kind of what we threw together. I don't know if there are comments from the board with regards to the wording, but I'm obviously fully in favor of this right now. But I just think it's important that we reaffirm that we as a board and we as a district clearly support the goals we agreed to back in the spring.
So 8.2, discussion.
No.
But does somebody else want to
Yeah, no, I
make a
just wanted
comment?
to say I fully support this resolution as well, and I'm particularly pleased that we have tied it to the strategic plan that we're actively engaged in right now, and people who are involved with that can see how much of those action teams' work relates specifically to the equity goals that have been outlined over this past year. But I do encourage people to, I think this would be online on the board
It'll be
documents.
online.
Right.
Yes,
so people
there.
can read them over and let us know if others have comments or questions about the wording in it, because
We can make
we spent a good
changes.
deal of amount of time kind of wordsmithing it so that it reflected what we felt strongly about as a board. But words are powerful things, and sometimes one or two words can make all the difference. So we do encourage input from others in the community on the resolution, because we want to make sure it reflects,
The whole
as Paul
community.
said, our strong commitment to racial equity, and disentangle it from some of the implementation concerns that we've been talking about, that they are really parallel conversations. How we go about the ends are very different from the ends in themselves, but as a board, we are fully committed to the ends of racial equity as we've been discussing over this past year. So, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Anybody else want to talk? Ann, you have something to say? Ruth Ann, Brenda? Okay, moving on to 8.2, discussion of Urbana Middle School and Urbana High School requests. The Board of Education will discuss the requests and administrative recommendations relating to strengthening the discipline systems at Urbana Middle School and High School. Do we want to have a discussion on that?
So I'll start us off, and actually if I could have Ms. Brown and Dr. Wiemelt come up to the microphone just in case there are questions directed at them. At the board's places and in the back with the board packets, I basically pulled the slides off of the October 2nd presentations that were presented by Dr. Wiemelt and Ms. Brown, specifically around requests to support the changes in structures at Urbana High School and Urbana Middle School. And I'll actually start with the high school and just kind of run through for our viewing audience what these requests specifically were. And I would like to say that the administrative recommendation isn't a strong recommendation, but just more of a focus for the board to say that, to say that when we're discussing this, we're actually discussing the ones that specifically relate to maybe personnel supports or money supports around the issues of social emotional supports for our students and teachers. So at Urbana High School, the specific requests pulled off of that presentation were 2 to 3 additional student relations supervisors, also known as SRSs, for consistent supervision in the hallways and in areas like the front entrance as well. I'm going to read through them all, and then I'll go back and put some dollar signs on them, okay? So Certified Teacher in Restorative U, which Restore U is the in-school restorative room where students go for either restorative conversations or in-school suspension with social-emotional supports provided. And then establish guidelines and parameters for teacher hallway duty expectations and academic universal screeners. I'm not going to be discussing those tonight. At UMS, the additional supports requested were 1 additional student relations supervisor to permanently run the front desk or kiosk. That's specifically to assist with escorting students to and from the Urbana School-Based Health Center, as well as provide assistance to the office staff with the monitoring the entrance and exit of the door. 1 additional student engagement advocate to provide additional interventions for students across all 3 grades. This will allow for more students to be seen in tiered interventions. And then funds for teachers to assist with lunch, either with lunch, either with supervision or to free up support services to run lunch groups and or running relationship building lunch groups themselves. Now, that one I'm going to start with and then back up when I talk about these, in part because, and to be fully transparent, I had many individual conversations with board members, and those individual conversations with board members took place as we met at the middle school, as we talked about lunchroom, as we observed 6th, 7th, and 8th grade lunches, and talked about some of the problems that Dr. Wiemelt and some of his staff shared with us, both at board meetings and in individual conversations. As part of the individual conversations, I did contact each board member and say, you know, the lunchroom seems to be one of our biggest issues right now at the middle school, and I did not want to wait for a board resolution or vote to move forward on helping support some of these things. And so I asked the board if they would support an kind of executive decision on my part to offer to Dr. Wiemelt the opportunity for him to offer to his teachers on a voluntary basis the opportunity to have lunch groups in their classrooms or to supervise lunch, and that they would be paid for that as they went through. And so that is something that's already started. So I want to make sure that that's clear to everyone else. And Dr. Wiemelt, I don't know if you want to speak just a little bit about that one before I go back up and start talking about some of the others, and we can have a little discussion about recommendations then. So Dr. Wiemelt, could you talk just a little bit about that last recommendation and other things that you've done at lunches so far?
Yes. I was pulling up my email because I have one of our restorative practices facilitators is helping kind of organize this, and she sent out an email recently with the total number of students that have already been started to be in the lunch groups, which is over 100 students already out of the approximately 1,000 students that we have at the middle school across the 3 grades. 6th grade has about, I want to say, so it's 6th grade has the largest number of students out of the lunchroom eating in small groups with teachers. I want to say it's approximately 70 students. And then 7th grade has about 50 students, and 8th grade has about 40 students out with in small groups, on average about 8 to 12 per group or per teacher are eating lunch with teachers, building relationships with each other and building relationships with teachers, as well as we have had some additional staff in the lunchroom. So that has reduced at the 6th grade, which is our biggest group. We had 360 6th graders approximately this year, and we have 60 of them out of the lunchroom, out of the cafetorium, which has helped with the noise level. It's helped with just the bodies. When you walk into the cafeteria with 360 kids, it's hard to breathe. You know, there's so many people, so many bodies in the cafetorium. And so with 60 students out, 6th graders are doing very well in the lunchroom. It's going extremely well, especially now with 60 students out. Lots of teachers signed up. There's teachers that are signing up just to take maybe 4 or 5, to not necessarily for pay, but they just want to have a small group of kids with them during lunch, which has been very exciting to see. At 7th grade, we have decided to do both lunch groups as well as split the lunches into 2 locations for the first time, I believe, ever, but definitely in my most recent history in the district. So we have 2 of our 7th grade teams, which it's about 100 students per team, 110 students per team, are staying in the cafetorium, and one of our academic teams is eating lunch on the west deck in the gym. And so that's about 100 students on the west deck. And it has taken us about a week or so to kind of get the kinks worked out. We're still working out some of those kinks, but now when you walk in, I sent pictures to Dr. Owen yesterday. When you walk into the cafetorium at 7th grade, it is much calmer, much more manageable. The deck is much calmer, much more manageable. It presents other issues when it comes to PE and some other things in terms of supervision, but it's helped immensely. And at 8th grade, we have about, like I said, 40 students out eating lunch with teachers, and that's still our biggest group remaining in the cafetorium. We still have some work to do at 8th grade, but overall, lunch has improved dramatically. The first quarter of school, most of our safety concerns at that point were stemming from lunch. It either something would happen at lunch and it would literally happen in the cafeteria, or it would get started in the lunchroom, and then it would extend out of the cafeteria, and there would be physical issues, fighting issues stemming from lunch. So we have had much fewer issues around lunch. We have other issues we need to tackle, but in terms of lunch, it has gotten much better.
Thank you. So to back up then and start putting some dollar numbers on these for the board, and again, this is not an action item tonight, but this is something that I want the board to have some discussion. I'd like Ms. Brown and Dr. Wiemelt to answer any questions that they have, as well as Carol Baker, if we can talk about funding. So going backwards in order, so the funds for teachers to assist with lunch, either lunchroom supervision, that we can't put a firm dollar amount on because it depends on exactly how many teachers end up volunteering for that and how many students are in groups.
We currently have 203. I misspoke. 203 students in lunch groups right now.
Okay, so about 20%.
20%.
Okay, so so that is a rough estimate, and I saw that Carol Baker and I did what we usually do, which is overestimate our expenditures in hopes of underspending. And so roughly it would be around $40,000. And just if you want to know where the math is on that, it would be paying teachers for essentially 1 hour a day, and there are 140 days remaining in the school year, and teachers get paid $25 an hour.
And they get 1 hour a day.
And they get 1 hour a day
Okay.
for their
I'll clarify that.
for their pay. Yeah.
I would also say with this, and with Ms. Pettigrew's comment earlier and public comment, we do have some parents that are coming in and running groups once or twice a week as well, for free. We're not paying parents, but that would be a wonderful opportunity for more parent involvement, just to put that in there.
Okay, thank you. Back up, just to give you some numbers, one additional student engagement advocate at the middle school. The average of student engagement advocates with all costs and benefits is roughly $35,000. And that's the average, and so it depends on qualifications, but that's kind of the middle range there. And then one additional student relations supervisor, all costs and benefits, is roughly $25,000. And so for the middle school, we're looking at a total of roughly $100,000. I did not ask for, at this time, and if they want to do that live in progress, they can, but I did not ask for the building administrators to prioritize these, because I also know that things have changed a little bit in terms of the culture and climate of the building since October 2nd. So think about that. It's foreshadowing, I think is what they call it. Going back up to the high school, a certified teacher in Restore U with, if we're looking at a first-year teacher with all supports and benefits, we're looking at around $52,000. That's what we budget. And then 2 to 3 additional student relations supervisors. Again, that's $25,000 each, so that's $50,000 to $75,000. Now, I will say this, as Carol Baker and I were digging, we did find some areas. Most of this, one of the questions that the board had is, where would these come from? And most of this would come out of the education fund. And so it put the education fund more in the red. However, as we were going through some of the initial reports, we did find that there were some areas where there's at least one, and maybe Carol, I'll let you.
Kathy wanted me to point out that these are the salaries for the teachers as a full year salary.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
The only thing that wasn't was the 140 days.
And that's true for student
Oh,
relations
that'd be true for all of those then, so.
So these aren't prorated amounts because, I mean, that's the human resource function. We'd start them with a start date of the end of November, perhaps. So they wouldn't receive the full year.
So these are well overestimated then. Thank you for pointing that out.
You think of them as annual salaries, because if these are something we're going to put in place, it's going to be something we're going to not just have for 1 year, we're going to have it every year thereafter, so.
Which is a good point. But, so as you think about this year's ad, though, but that doesn't
25%
necessarily mean
future ads. It could just be during the time of transition, at least that was the discussion before.
Yep.
So,
These are all.
so it wouldn't be cut in half, it would be cut by?
25%.
25% is what you just said? I'm sorry.
That's what he said.
Okay.
Yep. So thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. So then we're talking around, again, it'd be maybe 80,000 for middle school and maybe 108,000 for the high school. I did that without a calculator. So I'm not sure that that was 100% accurate, but as I was starting to say, most of this would come out of the education fund, and so that would put the education fund more in the red. However, as Carol Baker and I were digging, we did find that there were a couple areas where, because of either hirings or, in one case, we had an individual hired as a clinical professional at the high school in the summer, who then did not actually end up starting, and that turned into, I believe, an SEA, who they hired an additional SEA because they had someone who'd been interviewed and was ready to go. And so there is a little bit of wiggle room in that case, it's the Title I grant. They could pick up a small portion of the high schools, maybe $40,000 or $50,000 of the high schools. So the board asked for where the money would come from. It would come from the education fund, and a piece of it would come from Title I. Did I represent that well?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, board.
Does the board have any questions for the principals?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, appreciate the information. I know, last spring when we approved several new positions to support, at the middle school and high school to support the new approach, because even though we knew that the new positions would stretch our budget, because we really wanted the new approach to succeed, and we kind of went in, kind of reluctantly approved the several new positions, and I don't have that information before me. You could probably say how many, but it was beyond, more than what we typically do, because we all really wanted this new approach to get out of the gate with as much support as possible. So it's, here, a quarter into the new year, to be looking at, another 100,000 worth of staffing, when we thought we were already front-loading our staffing to ensure this succeeds, is sort of hard to kind of fathom, because, as you say, it would put our education budget further in the red, which is not something, that is wise to do. We have other education needs, across the district, that puts them in increasing jeopardy. So I guess I have two questions. One is, how many of the positions that you just described do you see as temporary, meaning this year only?
Good evening, board.
Good evening, Ms. Brown.
I see that some of this can be temporary. I can go for an additional 2 SRSs for this year, specifically looking at the trend data and those areas that we have the most congregation within our student population during passing periods. And our lunch shifts are very tricky in regards to supervision. So it's a way that we can stagger some of the positions and have those SRSs not there all day, but there's specific times within the day that the SRSs could be very valuable. So I do see it not as a long-term resource, but somewhat of a temporary option for this year.
The 2 to 3 SRSs?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
And then, I don't know, you're not just this year.
I would say we could look at, if we were prioritizing what I would say the greatest need would be the additional, as I sit here right now, and if I change my mind, I'll come back to the board, but that I believe the student engagement advocate is the most important at this point. But I think if we could, over time, strategically have our current number of SRS staff be able to be in positions at the front door Right now, we need all of our SRSs out in the halls and by the classrooms, because one of our main issues right now is the student hallway behavior. Once we get that under control, I think then we could restructure where people are located throughout the day and always have someone at the front. And the lunchtime funds, I think, over time, I think we could scale that back.
Yeah. But Joe, so which of those do you think are temporary? I mean, or maybe none of them are, I mean, so it's just the SRS, the student SEA. Do you see that as a temporary need, meaning this year as we work through the transition, or not?
I think they all potentially could be temporary if we really strengthen our current systems that are where we have gaps in our current system. I think our current structure is we have 2 SRSs and 2 SEAs per grade. That should be, once we get things more in line and implemented the way we want them to run, I think that would be enough. But I think, so this additional support, I think, could be temporary. All 3 bullet points. But right now, they're desperately needed.
Yeah. Well, and I support the funds for the classroom small groups. I mean, I was among the ones that talked to Dr. Owen about that. I mean, the cafetorium in the middle school just has severe physical limitations.
Or if we could build a second cafeteria.
Right. I mean, just going to the lunch at middle school and high school back to back, which is what I did in my recent visit. I mean, it's just, the space.
Over time, I think we could look at master scheduling and look at reducing the number of kids that go to lunch at one period. That's going to take some work because we have contact times, teacher-student contact time, contract language that we have to look at. But the way the high school runs their lunches in terms of A-B lunches for those 3 periods, we could look at something like that in the long term at the middle school that would reduce the number of kids at lunch at one time.
Yeah.
And I would just like to add that right now, we have a SRS in our restorative U room, which is our in-school suspension, eliminating that person from being in that room and now supervising the hallway and having a certified teacher to really help support our academic needs is something that I am looking to do as well. So again, removing one of those SRSs from the restorative U room, having a certified teacher to provide that specific academic support, because some of our students who are assigned to that room have severe academic deficits, and we need someone who has the background and the expertise to really help students to understand, again, not just the content, but have the pedagogical practices and skills to help students, again, close some of that achievement gap within that time they're in the restorative U room.
Thank you.
Did you have any?
No, I'm good.
Okay, I have a couple questions for you. First of all, at the high school, can you tell me exactly how many SRS you have right now on staff?
I believe we have 7, but they are not all there throughout the day. They have staggered start and end times.
All right. And how many do you have at the middle school?
The same.
7?
We have 7 that are staggered start and end times as well.
All right. And how many SEAs do you have?
The middle school has 6 SEAs.
Okay. And at the high school?
At the high school, we have 3 full-time and 1 part-time.
Thank you.
So say my kids have already reported back that the changes at lunch make a night and day difference.
Awesome.
Both of them. They're really, really appreciative of the changes you've made already. So thank you for go ahead and doing that even without our okie dokie. So thank you. I in our walk through the buildings, you did point out the lack of front desk coverage, and I think that's absolutely essential for security that we get somebody in there. So I'm fully in support of adding that at a bare minimum, along with the lunch supports desperately needed.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, our office staff can kind of do both, but it's way too hard when it gets busy. It's way too much to ask.
Here we go. The first part of my question was already answered when Brenda asked it about how many we currently have at both schools and support staff. I wanted to know how many we had last year, and the reason why I ask is I'm trying to draw a correlation between what's changed. Because behavior's been a problem. We've been hearing that, since the start of school. And yet we have more staff there. So is the disconnect because we're not implementing our policies well enough, we're not training the staff well enough, or we're truly overwhelmed by the number of students? I mean, the student populations haven't gone up that much, have they, for both schools in the course of the year? So I'm just trying to figure out what's changed, that even when we added more support staff, when we to add more support staff at the end of last year, that still hasn't fixed things. So what's broken, not broken, but what is the disconnect? Where are we falling behind?
Some of the same issues that are occurring this year have been occurring for years. Just with this new administration, new change, some of those issues have come to the forefront and come to the surface, but this is nothing new outside of what's been happening before our principalship. Specifically, some of the hallway behavior at the high school, students roaming, tardiness, that's nothing new. We're just now trying to adapt and make sure that we change the parameters of our SRS's responsibilities and their roles to provide more supervision within our hallway. But there always have been some areas that has been have limited supervision based on the time of day, specifically during the lunch shift. So that's why I added that those additional SRSs specifically during our lunch shift would be beneficial, because those are the pocket areas where some of our staggering is happening. Some of our SRSs are we're going on lunch when students were going on lunch, and we had made some changes even with that, but we still have, again, some limited supervision during our 3 lunch shifts.
I would echo a lot of the same sentiment in regards to the behaviors. I would say one of the things that I think has happened at the middle school is we had a lot of new staff. We had 40 new staff members this year. So, and a lot of that in the administrative team was new. I think we also have a lot of new teachers to the profession. We still have some vacant positions that are filled with subs. So I think we have gaps at every level that we're still trying to fill. And while I think roaming, tardies, inappropriate language, disrespect to staff, and fighting happened in the past, I know they did when I taught there. I think that's still happening, like some people mentioned before, but I do think there are some things that have escalated. I fully acknowledge that. I think when you mentioned we've the added staff at those grades, I think we are still working. We haven't been fully staffed for one. We've had some folks out on medical leave. We've had some, like I mentioned, long-term subs. We have not been fully staffed one day this year at the middle school. So that's hard to answer. I think we still have to tackle some things that we need to get a better handle on. We're ramping up our consequences and supports and interventions as it relates to the tardies and roaming. We're having a Saturday school with lots of kids this Saturday. We're having in-school suspensions next week related to roaming and tardies with interventions in place for that. So the beginning of the year was a difficult start in terms of safety. We have that, I believe, at a much better place now. It's not perfect, but now we have to tackle the ongoing hallway behaviors and the inappropriate language and defiance, disrespect, which is a middle school thing that we have to tackle. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, partially. You brought up some of the things that I wanted to bring up, and that is my concern with adding more staff is if the authority or policies are not there for the existing staff, I don't think throwing more staff with ineffective policies or authority is going to help. I mean, I know that sounds awful. I've heard from a lot of people talking at both schools saying that the hallways are chaotic. There is disrespect. There is zero accountability for tardiness, and so my worry is that
it's untrue.
Well, but I've heard from teachers who've told me this, who say that they've lost time teaching every day because of the amount of noise that's out in the hallway, basketballs being, you know, up and down the corridor, kids shouting at each other, where students who are in the classroom say to their teachers, are they fighting right now, or are they just horsing around? So that's, I mean, that's just an anecdotal thing. Are the support staff who are there now given the authority to give immediate consequences to kids who are tardy? What is our tardy policy? What are the consequences to kids who are running up and down the hallways or screaming obscenities? I mean, I think that if we all came together and made crystal clear to all of the staff in all the schools, all of the parents, the students, and the community that we're cracking down on this, I wonder if that's not going to help the problem without having to add more staff. I mean, in years past, of course these were problems. But were they to the level where teachers were being called obscene names, or kids would just deliberately be out in the hallway? And I've heard it said that when a teacher says, what are you doing in the hallway, the kid just literally turns their back on this teacher and just waltzes off because they know that nothing is going to happen to them. If there was more authority given to the people who are supposed to be in charge to stop that, nip it in the bud, wouldn't that be a cost-saving measure before having to hire more staff? And I'm not an expert. I don't have the answer to this. I'm a parent. You know, I see the way different people discipline children in different ways, and I don't believe in punishing people, like harshly punishing people, but, you know, consequence for not showing up on time to class, consequence for being in the hallway when you're not supposed to be. If that got addressed immediately, that would break the chain that leads to escalation, escalation, escalation. Kids say, oh, I can miss class 3 times in 1 week and not get a penalty. I could swear at a teacher too, maybe. That gets tested out, and then more things happen. And I'm just really concerned that we're not approaching it the right way. So that's a really broad philosophical question I'm asking you, but of course, you know, when money's brought up, I want to know how it's going to be spent to fix it. And that's my question. And you may not be able to answer this right now, but I think that I know I'm speaking for a lot of my constituents, a lot of people in the community, and teachers and families who have told me this. This isn't just me with my own personal discipline style. This is what people have said to me.
Sorry. When I said that's untrue, I want to clarify what I mean by that. I don't mean that kids aren't doing that, and I don't mean that there are kids that are just, that it's untrue that there are kids disrupting learning in the hallways, and those. What I said was untrue is that there's no consequences. We still administer consequences. There are kids that still do it after the consequence.
So what changed from, and I know you weren't the principal last year, but what changed from last year and the years past to what's happening now? Because you can't just say, well, it's always happened. It's never happened at this level. I mean, I've had kids in this district for, you know, since 2006. My kids have gone through every level of schooling here, and they've never talked about this at home. I mean, it's a daily occurrence that they witness and their friends witness, and I cannot be convinced that this is just same old, same old. It's worse. So what are we doing? What are we not doing to fix this before we start spending more money? You know, can we think about other ways, aggressively talk and collaborate on other ways that we can fix this without having to bring in more staff?
So I would like to just address the tardy policy. Specifically, there is a tardy policy at the high school that on your first tardy, you receive the detention. That system created hundreds of unserved detentions. So talk about a system that wasn't working. It was evident with the tardy policy. Right now, we do have consequences for students with tardies. We run a report every week. We just had our first Saturday school, October 27th, for those students who had excessive tardies and also skipping and roaming and various other behavior issues as well. So a system that wasn't working, and we created, not really even created, but adapted that system to ensure that we have accountability, not only for those students, but also get parents involved and not hundreds of unserved detentions. Outside of the tardy policy, you know, I definitely want to, again, welcome board members to the building to see for ourselves. Some of this information is taken secondhand. Some of the information is taken from children who's getting it from children and from kids. So I really want to invite, I thank you for those board members who have visited the schools, but want to invite the board to come and witness firsthand and not get information secondhand that sometimes could be misconstrued and does not have accurate information.
Yes.
Can you, do we know, though, how many SRSs and SEAs we had at the middle school and high school last year? I mean, maybe you don't know because you weren't there.
We have
but-
less SRSs this year than we did last year.
So you had fewer than 7 last year?
We had 8 SRSs
I'm
last
sorry,
year.
you had
We have
8?
7 this year.
Oh, okay, so you had 1 fewer. And then the SEAs, is that, do you know, happen to know that?
But I don't think there were SEAs, even 1
Okay.
or 2 SEAs.
There were 2 SEAs at the middle school
Thank you.
last year, and I believe 2 at the high school last year.
Thank you.
And,
Clinical professional at the high school last year.
and,
I can get the exact numbers on that. In fact, Carol and I were looking a little bit at that data more for this year than last year.
and the SRSs at the high school, do you know?
8.
It's the same, yeah.
There were 8.
Eight
There were 8
last-
actually down. And that doesn't tell the whole story because with SRSs, some of the ones who were hired years ago were working 7 hours or more, and now SRSs work 6 hours. We do overlapping lunch
Right.
when they talk about staggered start times.
No, I just want to underscore what Ann said. I've been on the board for 10 years. My kids, all 3 kids went through the schools. This was 20 years ago, but, and yes, there were fights and there was certainly disrespect on my 10 years on the school board and when my kids went to school there. That is not new. It's just the degree of which it occurs. And while I value my visits to the schools, I've been a teacher too long in my own life to know that a snapshot is just a snapshot. So if I happen to see wonderful things, when people visited my classroom and they saw wonderful things, I knew that just happened to be one snapshot. The next day could be miserable and vice versa, which is only to say the snapshots I see are important when I visit schools, but what matters more to me are the boots on the ground people, the teachers and the students and the parents who contact us and speak before us or contact us individually who are there every day, because they are there every day. So I really counter, my, small slice of observation with those who are there every day. And the degree of problems that we're seeing this year is just monumentally, very many degrees higher than last year and certainly any other year that I've witnessed the district. And so, yeah, we're all sort of struggling with, so what, we have a new system, we have some new kind of positions, and things need to settle in the way, we understand it all has to kind of work together. It's like a lot of gears in this machine that need to work together, but I am kind of have the same question Ann raised, which is, it sounds like the policies aren't well understood by everybody because we have so many new staff at the secondary level, and is spending money that we don't really have, that we've already kind of stretched last spring. Is that really the best solution, or is it figuring out how to make what we have work better, the way to go? So it's not that we don't want this to succeed, it's just, we've already sort of stretched a budget that we didn't have last spring, and now we're told that, no, but we need more, and it feels like, it's just hard to justify when we have so many needs in the district, and we kind of put a lot in this bucket last spring to do that again, So it's.
And I just want to say, I go along with Ann on some of the things that she said. I see it visually. People come to my office and bring me stuff. So I see it. It's not like I go by hearsay. They come to me. Some people have complained that their children haven't been part of Restorative Circle. Anybody involved should be a part of that. I won't have that. Secondly, and I'm not talking about the high school, I'm talking about the middle school, I'm sorry. But the middle school, I don't hear as much about the high school as I hear about the middle school. I get, I'm at work, I'm dealing with crisis. And here, I have to hear about this. And it's never, I had 3 kids come through Urbana. I had a boy, So I know. But the one thing I'm hearing from the parents, you're not letting them in to help. You know, all this money, like Don said, 52,000. Then you get 2 or 2.5. It's 50 to 75,000. That does not equal 100 and something. It's 225,000 minus the 100,000 that the middle school is asking for. When we got parents crying out that probably the kids, you say a face that looks like mine, if they see this parent, they might give them some respect. I'm trying to cut down on the dollars. And so we've got to work around here. And I also have a suggestion. We need to go back and look at that discipline book, because on the tardies, I've lost perspective on that, how it applies to what they're doing. And I know as a social worker, intervention. If it doesn't work, we got to do something else. So you say you're giving these, well, then why is still 15 still in the hallway? So, and people are there with their phones. And I'm everywhere. So I'm letting you know that what you say, it's not a lot of times hearsay. To me, it's visual. So I'm just trying to come to some way that we don't have to use a lot of money. You got Ronnie, you got Miss Pettigrew, you got Miss Jones. Y'all don't even return their calls. They want to come in and work in the schools. Miss Jones is retired. So, I mean, we got to do better. The kids might be better if they see that person. So we all got to get on the same page when it's about these children. And whatever it takes the whole community. We're not putting all the load on the teachers. I heard parents say they want to help. So I'd like to see that.
I'm happy you said that. I did send out a survey to parents to solicit volunteers to come into the building. At this point, I had 4 responses out of 1256. So I am asking for parents to come in as well, not just at the middle school, but at the high school as well.
Okay, and the middle school, I need to hear that too.
I sent it out. I got 15 responses.
Okay.
Everyone who's responded has been in and has volunteered.
That's great. That's a start. That might cut down 100,000. So, yeah, that might work. So anybody else want to discuss on the request? Is this something that we want to bring back later, or what? I need to hear from you all where you want to go with it.
Well, was that the
This is a first. Do you need any more
Well,
information?
I think they're looking for direction from the board with regards to whether we want to do an action item next time around, and for how, for how much, what parts of it.
I see. What do you all want to do?
Our teachers, our administrators, and other people that are in the building with our precious cargo go through interviewing and background checks and fingerprinting. We do something to that extent with the mentors that are going to be working one-on-one with children, correct? If I can just get some nods. And we are, and God love them all. We are asking for help, and we have volunteers who would love to come into the schools. And we are hoping that they could be regular faces that our students will be can get familiarized with. What are we asking of them for the uncomfortableness that some parents might have with a whole bunch of strangers coming in and watching their children all day, who are not on the payroll of the school district? There's a little bit of a concern about that. privacy issues, what gets done with the volunteers that come in who can't go back out into, or should not be going back out into the community and saying, oh, little Johnny so-and-so was busy doing this all day long, and blah, 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 and making fodder about that. That's kind of has been a concern. So the training, I guess I'm finally coming up with just the plain word of training. What do walk-in volunteers need to be with our children safely in our school buildings?
So we have a volunteer handbook that goes through all of the requirements for several levels of background checks, depending on what kind of contact with students they have. So, as you mentioned, the C1-to-1 mentors, they have the highest level of background check. They go through pretty much everything that every teacher and employee goes through because they meet with students one-on-one in oftentimes unsupervised spaces. Someone that's coming in to volunteer just once to maybe have lunch with their kids in the lunchroom with their own children, they wouldn't have to go through a background check if they were doing that one time. If they were coming in multiple times, we would do a basic background check on them. And then from there, there's also training that goes in with each building has volunteer coordinators and mentoring coordinators who help process the volunteers coming into the building and do some initial training. Part of that training is talking about issues of mandated reporters and confidentiality with students. And, there's a variety of trainings that Tom Howley offers for volunteers and mentors. Not all of it's required, because not every mentor or not every volunteer, I should say, needs 4 hours of training to walk in and help out in a classroom. But there's a variety of training that does take place and can take place based on what kinds of things we're asking the volunteers to do.
And school is not under HIPAA. Johnny gets in trouble, the whole community knows about it. So we won't go there because confidentiality is not in the school. It would be worse if we did. But they're not under HIPAA. If that kid acts up, believe me, I hear about it. So I know other people here. It's nothing confidential unless it's shared with the counselor or social worker, and it's not on us. But there's no HIPAA related, except maybe with you, Todd, with your program.
As far as medical behavior and so on.
Yeah.
And happily, I mean, Urbana School District does have a long history here of welcoming
The
parents,
parents, yeah.
volunteers, a strong mentoring program, strong volunteer program, and a solid system in place. So having lots of adults in the building, it was true when I was a teacher, and it's only grown from there.
And Danville is doing it, and we don't hear too much about them. The community has come in and working with those kids. So it's time for us to do something.
Yep.
So that's what I'm saying.
The
And you got
community-
people that want to do it, let's not run them away.
No, that's right, that's right. There are some people that do not want to volunteer because they would like to volunteer, they're a little afraid to do it because they don't know. So I had to ask, so we could put it out there publicly so everyone would understand a little bit better and pass it around, that they are welcome to come. Please don't hesitate. And these are the parameters that you get to volunteer within. Thank you.
We love our volunteers, but we're not going to find a volunteer who's going to cover the front desk all day long.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, to that end,
Yeah,
I mean, I think
yeah,
back to the
front
question,
desk.
I think it's
Yeah.
before us, which of these individual asks are we willing to support in an action, and that would come before us next week. And for me, I would certainly, I think, support
Front desk.
the SEA at the middle school, and lunch supports at the middle school, and the restorative higher at UHS. That's where I am today. But this is what my fellow board members think.
I'm not there. I'll do the front.
Joe had mentioned that the highest priority is one student engagement advocate, and so I'm willing to honor that. I mean, if it's this year only, I mean, I sort of feel like we've already kind of shot our wad for this coming year. But if adding your highest priority need outside of the cafeteria support, because we've already recognized that that's happening, and I'm fully in support of that. But in terms of brand new staff, if your highest priority is a student engagement advocate, I figure you know better what will make the difference. And if we can't do all of it, I'm willing to support that. I didn't get from Ms. Brown what your highest priority is of the SRS or a certified teacher in the restorative U room.
Certified teacher in the restorative U.
Okay, so I'm, again, you guys know better what would make a difference, and short of getting it all, I could support.
I'm worried about the front door.
Right, well.
I'd probably switch to that right now.
Okay. So not the SEA, but the SRS is your higher priority. Okay, well then I guess that puts me in basically what Paul said. Parent support, SEA and lunch, UMS, and then the restorative hire at the UHS. I could support, but again, I see that as this year only, because I feel like we've obligated ourselves to quite a bit of additional personnel for the secondary level this year, and I just, it doesn't seem fair to the rest of the district, frankly, when we don't have that money to shortchange others. So that's what I'd be willing to consider.
Looking forward to next year and the budgeting planning that goes into next calendar year, I think it would be, I personally would be willing to devote more resources into training our existing staff so that we don't have to hire more staff. I think that would be an effective. We believe in education. Might as well educate our educators as much as we can, and I think that would probably it wouldn't be an ongoing expense, and I think it would provide more bang for the buck myself. But that's just my initial sentiment. But that's something I'd like you to consider as you look toward next year.
I agree with what everybody said about that. I don't want to close the door on anything. It's just that I don't want to approve any spending until I know exactly where we are with the discipline. I want to know how the policies are rolling out, how they're working, how they're not working, where the holes are. Where are the gaps that are causing the more chaotic classrooms, hallways, all of that, and figure out where that is. And then we can talk about money, because I get yelled at by my family all the time for just wanting to spend the money on the mechanic or whatever it is without even asking what the problem is or trying to fix it myself, and I'm trying to apply that policy to us to be as careful as we can with our tax dollars and say, let's see what we're doing wrong ourselves, not wrong, but how we can do it better ourselves first. So that's how I want to start this. I want to look carefully at what we've been doing so far this year and where the holes are and where we can fix them, and then see what else we can do after that. I do think that the lunchroom thing, I fully support that. I really like your suggestion about seeing if we can do the split lunches like they do at UHS, because that allows time in the gym or time in the library. I know that's what a lot of the kids at the high school make use of, is to get their study support time in the library or wherever they go in study hall rooms. I'm sure there'd be lots of kids who'd make use of that, and that would take the pressure off the cafeteria. I really want to continue that discussion into next year. So I just want to put a pause and do more fact-finding before I'm willing to say yes or no to anything.
You guys.
You all got some thinking to do in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think I need to find out some more information. I feel like Ann said, if our staff needs to be trained more, let's get it done to ensure everyone's safety. It sounds like we have plenty of staff in place right now to do the job at hand. I'm leery about voting for all of these things, so I would seriously have to think about it before I can actually make my decision tonight.
It's yours too. I just want to say too, and I didn't say that, but for those staff that are not doing their job, I want them reprimanded too. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say. Those staff that are not doing their job and letting this go on, it's gonna stop. So moving on.
So what I'll do, just to provide some closure to this discussion and maybe a suggestion, I'll ask Dr. Wiemelt and Ms. Brown at the November 20th to come back with some additional information if the board has specific questions about data. I believe that they presented that at October 2nd. I'm happy to have them present it again on November 20th. What's working, what trainings have taken place this fall, and we'll continue the discussion.
Thank you for staying.
Thank you. 8.3, discussion of 2018-19 tax levy. Carol, I'll let you talk.
Sure. I wanted to kind of give the board a little information. The proposed tax levy that I'm going to be bringing to the board at the next meeting. When I presented the budget, there was one or two board members that expressed concern about the deficit in O&M and how we may want to look at some strategies on how we're going to possibly start doing something about giving some more money to O&M. So, and possibility of maybe doing that with this first tax levy. And I did express some concerns that we already had budgeted based on the levy being a certain way, and I would kind of want to stick to that for this budget. Any change in that would obviously make the budget we proposed and approved worse off in the ed fund if we start diverting some of that money to O&M. But Marcellus, who's interning under me this semester, and I are working on a 5-year plan to address that. And we are going to have something at an upcoming meeting to present to the board on how we can address the strategies for getting O&M out of deficit. Currently, their tax rate in O&M is at 57 cents, and the maximum is 75 cents. So there is room to give more money to O&M. But obviously, if you're going to do that, you're going to take it away from one of the other funds. So we want to take some time and look at that and make sure that we know what the effects of that are going to be and that the board is willing to do that, because that means there may be cuts in other funds. So if we're going to do that, I just want to let you know that it doesn't have to be done at this time when we approve the levy at the next meeting. We will have some time to look at that and think it through a little further. Because of the hospital tax exemption case is still not finalized, we will be ballooning. I'm going to be proposing a balloon levy like we've done in the past. If they lose their tax exemption and that money would come back on as new EAV, we want to make sure that we are able to capture that and think about what we're going to do with that money or give some of that money back to the taxpayers. But if we don't do that, we could lose that money and that potential forever. So I will be balloon levying, and because of that, we will have the opportunity to make a decision later to move some of that money around to other funds if we want to. I don't have to make that final decision until April when the tax rates finally come out. I have like a week to be able to adjust money around from Ed Fund over to O&M, however we would decide that we want to move that money around within our tax rate. So I just wanted to let you know that it doesn't have to be made yet. We will be coming back with some strategies and a plan. But right now, for the proposed levy for next meeting, I will be balloon levying. And there will be flexibility provided in that so that if we want to later on decide to divert some of those tax dollars to O&M, we will be able to do that up through April. So just wanted to give you a heads up about that. Thanks. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to Corey Boaz, who is with Studio GC. He is here to talk about the UHS UMS campus site plan study. It is now 5 minutes to 10. And so we appreciate you staying with us throughout this. And I think, Lori, if you could get the lights above the screen there, and Corey, if you need any help setting up. Corey met with high school, middle school administration, and Mr. Abatessa and myself. We talked through kind of timelines. We did an initial walkthrough of the campus, talked about needs of the buildings, reviewed the facility planning documents that the board approved year before last. And Corey's here to kind of outline a timeline and an approach to the work. So take it away, Corey. Make sure you turn the microphone on in front of you. Perfect.
Pardon, sir? Okay. Thank you. Vice President Ron Gay, Superintendent Owen, Board of Education, Public, thank you for inviting me to address the board on where we are with the campus land use study. I will be brief, so. But basically just wanted to go over what we've done so far, where we are currently, and what will be happening in the future. Just a couple weeks ago, we were officially approved by the board. Thank you. And almost immediately after that Friday, we did have a kickoff meeting with, like Don said, Superintendent Don Owen, Todd Taylor, Matt Abatessa, Principals Weimelt, I apologize for the pronunciation, and Principal Dolores Brown. Did a nice little tour of the facilities and the campus. So. I can talk through it. So where we are right now, basically in phase one of the proposal. From the 10,000 feet view of that, that's the information gathering stage. Interviewing with the end users of the building, the community, that is actually starting tomorrow. So after school and then in the evening, we did a kickoff tour. We got some initial thoughts, initial ideas, some points that Dr. Weimel actually mentioned with the cafeteria, and I'll review some of those. And also I have several images, just aerial views and short little slides of some of the ideas we have seen, just as we don't have any proposed changes yet, but right now we want to get all the information first before we start putting pen to paper. So already went through some of those items. So, brighten up a little. So basically, first item we walked through was Iowa Street. And to give you some background, I've obviously been to this campus several times. My partner, Pat Callahan, has never actually been to the high school. So we carpooled down for this kickoff meeting. And I basically told him, I'm not going to tell you where to go. So I know part of the facilities and grounds items were, well, where is the main entry? So I'm not telling them where it is. So we came down Vine Street, took a ride on Washington, saw the parking lot. Said, okay, well, that's high school, that's the middle school. Got that figured out. So we quickly turned into the first row of parking on the north there. One way, wrong way. So found that out quickly, got backed out, turned the other way. As he got down to Iowa Street, turned in, said, okay, well, there's kind of where main entrance could be. Kind of went through Tiger Lane, went through the, where we saw other visitor parking. Again, wrong way, one way. So yeah, there's signs there, but it's really not instinctual. Couple items that brought up is during dismissal, Iowa Street is a zoo. Students, buses, cars idling, going both directions. Not really quite sure what's going on there. People are coming from everywhere. So again, these are just items we witnessed and we've heard from the people that we met with. Main parking, again, these are highlighting the main parking lots of both middle school and the high school. We noticed there's really no pedestrian designated areas. So you're parking out in vast amounts of asphalt, but there's really there's no sidewalks, there's no designated parking, there's no striping. So again, people are walking where people are driving. Not necessarily the best of things. Again, bring us to Tiger Lane, where the buses do the bus pickup. There's evidence on the curbs where buses can't make the turns. There's opportunities for this area. Maybe it's not bus traffic, maybe it's something else. But again, these are just some items we brought up. There's also a lot going on in this little alcove of space. We've got the health center parking. There's parking for like visitors parking for the driver's ed cars. There's parking for the auto shop, and just a little bit of everything going on. There's loading zones going through here, trash, and various little bits of everything, in just a little small space. Brings us to I'm not quite sure if we've termed this anything, but we're calling it an access drive in quotes. As we were walking through this area, this is between the high school and middle school. There's several students, several members of the community just walking back and forth. As we're doing that, we see a vendor drive through, like where people are walking. It's like, okay, how is that really safe? And then this vendor pulls into right near where the middle school cafeteria is, near the egress exit. Sure, it was fine. There's no emergency, but what happens if there was an emergency and there's a car there? It's probably not. We would term this really as an emergency access only. Yeah, we understand there are some conveniences for vendors, drop-offs and things like that, but any kind of term parking should probably not occur in this area. Brings us to the cafetorium, and since Dr. Wemo already went over this, I was going to talk through this portion and play this loudly and kind of show you, but that was already described. So thank you. I'm glad that has been addressed. Some opportunities where we've discussed possible expansion, possible outdoor learning, also possible performance spaces or shared curriculum spaces could be in this area. There's, as you can kind of see, there are some picnic tables out there which could be used for more specific lunch periods or gathering. Probably bought some pavilions in there to encourage people to use this area specifically without minimal cost, if any. Volunteers can come in, just some of the parents with their volunteering, some of the teachers, they could use this area. It is getting cold, yes, but during the warmer months, it'd be a beautiful space. Also, one of the comments and one of the things that we witnessed out there is PE is out in this area. There's no plumbing. So there's just simple water fountains for PE or for the athletics, concession stands, restrooms, something like that. These are all things that can be incorporated into this master plan. Again, master plan is 5, 10, 15-year, 20-year outlook. Possible expansion for the northwest lots that the district has acquired over the years. This is our blank slate right now. Pretty much anything can go here. Where we were walking by, we saw some raised beds for gardens, some community plots potentially. This area has a lot of opportunity that we're excited to develop. And lastly, the west entry, the main entry, the main facade of the building, not necessarily the main entry. Beautiful lawns right in front. It's not expansive, but simply just having kids out there reading or discussing or having group chats, something like that would be a great place to designate, hey, this is where you can go. So, again, next steps, like I said, tomorrow we're starting our first student use at the high school discussions. We have already several prompts ready, and I'm sure the kids are going to be excited to talk about what's going to happen with their campus. And also tomorrow night is our first community forum, the first of at least 3 or 4. And that's going to happen. All this information will be gathered up until the holidays, and we'll be ready to get going. So we're excited for this project. So.
Or great job.
Thank you.
Paul?
No, go ahead. I have one quick one.
Yeah.
Because my neighborhood is right, like within walking distance of both
Good.
schools, and so a lot of the neighbors who I represent live literally across the street. So I'm assuming you're getting input from all of the immediate neighbors on what their druthers are about this, right?
Yes.
And you're going to be asking the students themselves and the parents themselves. That's my main question. Is I know that neighbors have different questions than, say, the students do because of, how after hours things may affect them parking and getting in and out of home. So that's all I wanted to ask, but I'm sure you're gonna reach out far and wide. Thank you.
Done.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things we talked about was actually having, because we talked about having the forums be very specific, targeted at different groups. And so one of them, we're going to specifically say, hey, we're going to invite these people, flyer these doors and invite those people in. And so that's definitely what we're looking at doing.
Yeah. We want to make sure we get all the shareholders' input for this. So.
I just had a brief question. When you kind of targeted the cafetorium at the middle school, I guess I assumed that most of the work that we were doing was land use, was outdoors related.
You are correct.
Oh, okay.
This is kind of leading into the fact that we can provide outdoor space.
Oh, that would alleviate
That could
some of the.
alleviate some of it,
Gotcha.
yes.
And I like your ideas for using our outdoor space, because we have some lovely outdoor space for lunch times or for learning. Great, thanks for clarifying that.
No problem.
Looking forward to it.
So worry. Whoops.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any more questions? Well, thank you so very much.
No, thank you very much.
And I made a big mistake tonight. I forgot to acknowledge our camera people, and they've been so hard at work. It's 10 o'clock. I see Jason Liggett, and what's her name? Molly Sweeney. Thank you so much. And I apologize.
Take care.
Is there somebody else too? Austin, I can't see you. Where you at? Austin?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I didn't even see Austin. Don is going to do the school report card.
Okay, Corey, yours was 10 minutes. That was pretty impressive. I don't think I'll quite get there, but I'll come close. If I could have the lights off again here while I set up, that way it'll save time. Just making sure I know what's making the noises here. Okay, we'll see if this actually works. So, Board of Education, thank you for your attention here. I'm going to do a fairly quick update on the school report card. It seems to me that the last time I gave this specific report, I used the word flux to describe our state assessment system. That would have been in 2014 when I last was the one actually sitting here giving this report. And I believe that in 2011, I used the word flux when it came to our state assessment system. And in looking back over the years that I've done this PowerPoint, that seems to be the ongoing theme. So I will try not to use the word flux too much after the first slide coming up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over some highlights. One is updates about state assessments. There's the flux slide. Changes in the ISB rubric for school designations. I do have quite a bit on that because it's incredibly detailed. And for the first time, I can say they're actually using multiple measures, which is a good thing. I was on 2 different state committees that worked for over 2 years on putting together this school designation system. And personally, I will say, as with any committee work, some things that I advocated for were in, and some things I advocated for got left by the wayside. This is definitely a compromise, but it's much better than what it was before. I am going to talk about our data. I'll talk about that fairly briefly. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our school designations, and then talk about how we're addressing concerns and incorporating those concerns into our plans. So here's the quick history lesson. This is just since my superintendency. So in 2013, the ISAT was still the test of choice for the state of Illinois. And the cut scores were changed in 2013 to align with the new Common Core standards. So instead of giving us a new assessment, they just started moving the scores around. What that does is that erases any ability to talk about longitudinal growth or trend data, because you're now taking state assessment data and you're messing with the goal, essentially, is the way to put it. In 2014, we had 3 schools, Thomas Paine, Prairie, and King, participated in the park field tests. And essentially, ISAT went by the wayside. In 2015, all schools across the state took the park, and UHS takes the ACT as part of the high school version of park. It changed from the PSAE to the ACT plus park. In 2016, students in grades 5, 8, and 11 also take the Illinois Science Assessment, in addition to the park and ACT. And then in 2018, last year, the State Board of Education stopped its long-standing agreement with the ACT and the College Board, and they shifted over to the SAT for the high school assessment and dropped the park altogether at the high school level in favor of the SAT. There's quite a bit of controversy about that because most schools in this region and most state schools in Illinois typically had always used the ACT as the assessment. The SAT was new, and it had been recently, in 2016, it had been completely redone, realigned completely. So the SAT was essentially a new test for a lot. Both the ACT and the SAT in 2016, 2017 were also competing for a bigger and bigger piece of nationally assessing students. In 2018, in February, the state superintendent announced that park would be replaced in 2019. I'm not going to click on the link here, but for people who pull this out of the board packet online, that message from the state superintendent is about the need to come up with a better assessment. So when I talk about things being in flux, things were really in flux. So when we look at data, and we look at our data, there are 2 places that I want to point you to. One is the Illinois Report Card, and anyone can go to illinoisreportcard.com and compare any school in the state of Illinois that assesses students. So basically anything K through 12, you can find information there. If I look at our district, I just want to give you an overview of what you can see here. So, and I'm going to try not to touch the, there we go. It gives an overview of the park and the SAT from last year. This view also has what's called the DLM AA, and the DLM is Dynamic Learning Measures, which is the alternative assessment. I guess that's what the AA stands for. Is that right, Don? Which is the alternative assessment for students who have learning disabilities that prevent them from taking the park. Is that a good way to say it?
A very small percentage of students.
Very, very small.
Cognitive disabilities that take on.
Yes. So it's not for students to take the park with accommodations. It's for a very, very small number of students. And so this overview is a broad overview. All of these things that I'm showing you, you can dive down into more detail on. And so you can dig into the park. Takes a little bit to load here. And you can see that we're not doing as well as the state average in terms of the park scores for ELA. And this is, again, and I've said this before, this is a conglomerate of all scores of all students taking the park. So this is every student in 3 through 8th grade put together here. Not exactly the best way, but you can actually drill down into each grade level in each school. You can also look at things like the achievement gap. We talk a lot about equity, and it's important to take a look at different gaps among our student populations. And I've just clicked on too many here, but this is low income is the first one. You can see that we have some issues with low income. We also know that in this community, low income is a variable that is also, shall I say, racially identifiable because of racial inequities on a community level. And so you have similar gaps between, and I'm sorry, it's jumping around here on me. It's actually not my computer, it is the connection I have here. You see that the disparity levels are very similar between low income and non-low income and black and white students, okay? None of these things are acceptable, and none of these things are things that we are going to ignore or take lightly. We have a number of things that you've heard spoken about by building principals at the elementary level, middle school and high school, about how they're doing, what they're doing in their buildings to address these academic gaps, as well as disparities in discipline data. And I did not touch anything there, and it just reset. So, however, I do want to point out a few things on this, because there's new data that is pulled every year. And so one of the things that's on here are some of the key indicators of student success. Research since I was in school talked about the importance of Algebra 1 as what was called a gatekeeper course. Students that did not pass Algebra 1 before 9th grade, when I was in school, were much more likely not to get into a 4-year institution. Okay? That's when I was in school. And I have a few more gray hairs than most of our students. Now, we talk about Algebra 1 being an important gatekeeper for 8th grade. And so one of the stated goals that I've made several times publicly is that I want to see more of our 8th graders have the opportunity to take Algebra 1. Again, I'm not touching this, and it's just jumping away from me. If you take a look at the 8th graders taking and passing Algebra 1, we currently are at 39.1%. The state average is 30.6%. So that's a good thing. That's one of the celebrations that I have on a later slide. You can take a look at so many different levels of data in this new school report card that I really encourage you to spend time doing it. It is drillable, meaning you can get down into very minute detail. It also has, let's see if I can pull this up, it also has trend data for many of these, and so you can take a look and say, hey, are we doing better than we have in the past? So 4 years ago, we were at only 27%. Okay? Again, jumps away. 4 years ago, we were at 27%, now we're at 39. That's great. That's great trend data. We can actually drill down on a different slide, and I'm not going to touch it because it's going to jump away from me again, but we can drill down on a different slide to show how many of those students are African American and how many of those students are white, how many of those students are Latino, how many of those students are low income, and we can break it out by every demographic group. So we go from 8th grade to 9th grade, and we currently have 83% of the students who are finishing 9th grade in what's called on track. That means they've earned the appropriate amount of credits to graduate on time in 4 years. Okay? That's the state average of 86%. If we take a look at trend data, we can see that that's actually data that has improved for us over time, but not as fast as we would like it. The state data jumps all over the place from year to year. There's not really a trend line there. For us, there is a gradual upward trend. We also have graduation rate. So graduation rate this year dropped in 2018 for the first time in several years. And we're still looking at why exactly that is. There are a couple things that I will point out, and that is that for the past several years, for the past 5 years, this data is actually done, the first screen that you see here is actually what's called a 5-year cohort. And now what they've done is they've broken it out into percent of students who graduate in 4 years, percent of students who graduate in 5 years, and percent of students who graduate in 6 years. Okay? That's a little bit different than what the federal government was doing 2 years ago, actually at the end of the Obama administration, when they set a mandatory definition of graduation rate, because every state was calculating that term, which you say graduation rate, every state was calculating that differently. The Obama administration made it a universal definition, and that universal definition was set at a 5-year cohort. But now that some of the Obama administration rules have been rolled back, ISB is adapting to saying how can we provide the most accurate data even though there are no longer national definitions of what a graduation rate is. And so what ISB chose to do was present the data for all of these different cohorts. So a 4-year cohort, a 5-year cohort, and a 6-year cohort. So if you scroll down, you see that actually as we go through, we're at exactly what the state average is for graduation rate. Now, again, my hope, my dream, my vision is that we are actually at 100% graduation rate. And I understand that that's an unachievable goal with our mobility, but it's also a goal that we should not shy away from and make excuses about. The other thing that I will say is, and that I've been very proud about, is that our graduation rate is one of the things that we have put things in place for over 6 years to ensure that that's one area of disparity that we are closing gaps. And we are closing those gaps probably better than in any other area. And that's something that we should celebrate. So if you take a look at this, and I'm going to apologize. If you take a look at that, I'm going to take off the all. That is the graduation rate and the difference between our white students and our black students. There are very, very few high schools in the state that have done that good a job of closing the gap on graduation rate. And so that's something that I celebrate with all of our teachers, all of our educational support staff, and all of our administrators, not just our current ones. That's actually probably one of the biggest celebrations that we have, because it continues through many of our groups. So if we take a look at the disparities between white students and Latino students, we see that while it's not quite as consistent, in part that data is skewed slightly because we have a smaller number of Latino students than we do African American students or white students. Our African American student and white student population today are almost identical at the high school. We're running in the upper 30s for both. Okay, so 35, 36% for both. For our Latino population, it's still at around 11 or 12%. Again, I'm sorry that the site is not doing much. I'm going to move away from the site, go back to our data slide here, and encourage you all to dig into this data a little bit more on your own. I'm happy to also post up a few of these specific data points and share out with board members in the community as we go through. I want to talk a little bit about summative designations, because that's a new term for the state of Illinois. The summative designation is now what they would call in the past adequate yearly progress. Okay? So the summative designation is a primary mechanism for school accountability under the new federal legislation, Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. It's a multiple measures index of academic achievement and student success. It's developed in deep collaboration with stakeholders throughout the state. I can attest to that from the two different committees that I served on. One committee lasted over 18 months. The other was about a 12-month committee. It's designed to identify schools for supports and improvement, and it's including schools with subgroups needing support in otherwise high-performing schools. That is, it will identify, just as No Child Left Behind did, schools that have massive disparities, even if they have a very small group of either ethnically diverse students or students of color who, you know, it might look like an overperforming high school, but it might be because it's predominantly white upper middle class. They still might get identified in a different way if their subgroups aren't performing well. So here are the official designations. So there's two different bands. There's a K-8 band. So our K-8 schools get graded differently than our 9-12 band. Okay, our K-8 schools get graded on academic growth, which is a cohort growth model that takes a look at the PARCC scores from year to year. Okay, and how much have they improved from year to year? There's a very complicated formula that goes into that growth. I'm not going to get into that tonight because it's after 10 o'clock. But just to give you an idea, that growth is only 50% of the puzzle. Whereas in the past, AYP was based on a single test, single point in time, and it was not measured by growth. It was measured by one achievement test given once per year. Now that a state assessment is 50%, but it's based on a growth measure, not a single achievement measure. I saw a couple heads nod, and I have my glasses off, so I'm assuming that the nodding is because you understand and not because you're nodding off. There's also English language progress to proficiency. So that's 5%. If you have English language learners in your school, 5% of your K-8 band of your official designation indicator comes from your progress towards English proficiency. That's an interesting measure when you talk about a dual language school system that values bilingualism. We might not be working towards English proficiency as fast as we're working towards biliteracy. But I'm glad that it's only 5%. There's also ELA proficiency, which is the how well did we do on this test this year, English language arts, 10%. That's the old AYP numbers, okay? Math proficiency is 10%. The climate survey is 5%. That's the 5 Essentials survey that we've done every year since it was first piloted under Race to the Top. And then there's chronic absenteeism, which is 20%. I'm going to talk a little bit about that when I get there, because many of the news agencies talked about that idea of chronic absenteeism, because many districts, including Urbana, have some serious struggles with absenteeism. And I actually was on WILL and spoke to the News Gazette about chronic absenteeism when the state talked about using this as an indicator, because it's an important one. The 9-12 band is very interesting because they put different things in there. That ninth grade on track now takes up 6.25% of the puzzle. Chronic absenteeism drops from 20% down to 7.5%. There's college and career readiness takes 6.25%. And that's actually a series of 5 separate indicators that indicate whether a student is college or career ready. And then the climate survey is 5%, math and ELA proficiency is 10%, and then instead of growth, because there's really only one test in all of the high school 9 through 12 band, and that is right now the SAT, they don't have a growth rate, right? And so that 50% is now taken up by graduation rate, which actually means good things for Urbana, because we've always been at or near the state average, and we always do a good job with our subgroups. And when I say always, I'm talking 6 years. So what are the designations? Instead of what they used to be, which was exceeds, meets, does not meet, an academic warning, it is now exemplary, commendable, underperforming, and lowest performing. So just to go through these really quickly, and the print is small, an exemplary school is a school that has no underperforming student demographic group. That means that every racial subgroup is not underperforming and is not below the all students group of the lowest 5% of Title I schools. Okay, we're starting to get some if, ands, and puzzles there that are going to get a little complicated. And if it's a high school, it doesn't have a graduation rate, it has a graduation rate of greater than 67%, and whose performance is in the top 10% of schools statewide. Okay, so the big summary there is you have to be in the top 10% of schools statewide and not have any subgroups who are underperforming. That's the easiest way to put it. Because you're not going to have a high school of lower than 67% graduation rate and still be in the top 10%. Okay? That's an exemplary school, top 10%, easy way to say it. Commendable is a school that has no underperforming student demographic groups at or below the all students group of the lowest 5% of all Title I schools, a graduation rate greater than 67%, and whose performance is not in the top 10%. Okay? The simple way to say that is, if you're not an exemplary school, and if you are still above that 67% graduation rate if you're a high school, you're most likely a commendable school. If you're not a high school, you're a commendable school if you don't have any underperforming student demographic groups and you're not in the lowest 5% of all Title I schools in the state of Illinois. Underperforming really is where you get back to that ethnic disparity, racial disparity, racial gaps. Sorry, it is getting late for me too. So an underperforming school is one which one or more student demographic groups is performing at or below the all students group of the lowest 5% of all Title I schools. The school that receives underperforming in school designation will receive targeted support from a group called Illinois Empower. And a lowest performing is a school that is in the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools in Illinois, and any high school that has a graduation rate of 67% or less. Schools that receive lowest performing school designation will receive comprehensive support through Illinois Empower. So, I put a link down here that I would encourage board members to go to. It's a webinar slide presentation that's about 67 slides long that goes through the mathematical determinations of growth as well as these designations. It is actually, I think, a very good piece for board members, for parents, for educators to understand, but not at this time of night. So I wouldn't recommend you go home and do that tonight. So, Urbana School District 116 Summative Designations. This appeared in a story earlier this week, or actually last week, I'm sorry. Urbana High School is a commendable school. Urbana Middle School is underperforming. Dr. Williams and Wiley are in the lowest performing. And if you take a look, if you drill down and ask why, it is because of the disparity between white students and black students on the park. They are at the overall is below where it should be, and there's a greater disparity at those two schools. Okay? They're not to say that those two schools are failing schools, but those two schools have work to do. Okay? I'll talk more about that. Underperforming are Urbana Middle School and Yankee Ridge, and our commendable schools are Leal, Dr. Martin Luther King, and Thomas Paine. Okay? That is the first time, and I will say this too, up until a week and a half ago, the preliminary designations that the state was running didn't have the correct numbers. And so our schools did not know what these designations were until about a week and a half ago. Makes it a little difficult for planning in terms of things like communication. And that I will be completely transparent. It was very frustrating to me not to have that data 2 weeks in advance so that my team and I could be working on communication and talking points when they kept telling us, hey, we're really sorry, but this data isn't right yet. And I shared with the whole board a couple of the communications from ISB about that. And that was a frustration that I think every school district experienced. So what are our celebrations? If you dig into our data, there's celebrations both at staff and student level. 50% of our teachers have master's degrees or higher. We have a very educated staff. We have minimal racial gaps in high school graduation rates. And as I said, I have at times touted that in ways that probably minimizes the impact of racial disparities in other ways. And so I want to be careful about making that too big a celebration. 39% of our 8th graders pass Algebra 1 versus 30% across the state. 4 of our schools rated as commendable. Urbana High School, Leal, Martin Luther King, and Thomas Paine. Our overall enrollment, when you dig into this data, is very interesting. Between 2014-15 and 2017-18, which is essentially a 3-year period, we've gone from 4,077 students to 4,590. Okay? That's a significant increase in student population over a 3-year period, especially in a community that essentially has not had a great deal of economic development and growth. And so that's a major celebration. Our high school dropout rate is 1%, which is half of what the state average is. The state average is 2% across the state. I don't want to call it a percent as an average, but it's 2% across the rest of the state. What are our areas of concern? Our high school 4-year graduation rate was down to 80% compared to an average of 85% over the last 3 years. As I said, some of that data is data we're digging into deeply right now, trying to figure out what was different about last year. Why did that drop so much last year? We also have a chronic absenteeism rate at 30% for last year. Okay? It's the first time that they really have measured chronic absenteeism in that way. And so chronic absenteeism, then, this is kind of like a benchmark. 30% is not good. However, when you dig into those numbers, and I talked about this when I was on the 21st show on WILL, when you dig into those numbers, we do have a significant piece of that 30% who are what are called excessive excused absences. Those are parents and families who excuse their children from school more than 10 days during the school year. That is counted as part of that chronic absenteeism. Absenteeism is just not being at school. We have a lot of families that travel as part of their family dynamic, and we have students who are pulled out of school to attend conferences with parents or to attend family vacations during the school year. And as I look at it and I talk to superintendents, not just across the state, but even in this region, Urbana and Champaign have more of that happening than other districts, in part because of the University of Illinois and the academic calendars that are slightly different there. The park scores across all buildings were below the state average. Again, slight frustration for superintendents, for educators, for principals. We're not going to be using park next year. So we're going to be starting over again with a new baseline. We're in flux. 2 schools were rated at lowest performing, Dr. Williams and Wiley. Again, we've already identified why, and those principals already were working, starting over the summer, on their school improvement plans, identifying strategies to improve those scores. Overall, a park performance gap of approximately 30% persists between black and white students. That's overall. Again, we're going to be seeing a different test this coming spring, we think. How does this fit into our improvement goals? All schools are incorporating culturally responsive teaching through our PD sessions this year. All schools are building capacity in the areas of restorative practice, trauma-informed care, de-escalation, and classroom management in order to keep kids in class and engaged. Our instructional coaches are focused on supporting teachers with implementation of curriculum in language arts and math at the elementary schools and across the board at the high schools. The building level goals, as you've already heard, focus a lot on writing, math, and social emotional supports that are specifically designed at improving academic performance as well as in-class engagement. So the focus for us as a district is to develop specific action plans to achieve the district goals. The action teams that are working on the strategic plan, who are specifically working on academic achievement, now have this data to look at as well. And they are working at developing action steps to say, hey, how can we do a better job? Developing strong curriculum instruction and assessments to measure progress towards student goals. One of the things we didn't talk a lot about tonight when we were talking about the high school requests was one of their requests was about academic screeners. You know, the high school has not used academic screeners like NWEA and MAP, which are commonly used screeners since they dropped the DEA back, let's see, I guess it would be 8 years ago. Engaging families and communities in supporting our students in schools. I could talk about all the ways that we're doing that. The board is very familiar with that, and as we heard tonight, both in public comment and in the comments of our high school and middle school principal, we welcome families. We welcome the engagement. We learn from the engagement, and it's essential that we are partners with our families to improve student outcomes. The state assessment data will be used in conjunction with classroom and district assessments to provide additional information about students and school progress. There is a disconnect between our 8th grade algebra percentage and the park scores, and we need to figure out why that disconnect is there. Using multi-tiered systems of support to support all students, we will, again, address issues of social-emotional supports and classroom management. And then we're also already in the process of applying for the grants and accessing the additional funds to support and receive the technical assistance through Illinois Empower, which there's also a link in the presentation, the Illinois Empower page for our schools with underperforming and lowest performing designations. And just as a reminder, as the board talked about tonight, we are a community devoted to dismantling inequitable practices so that all students can reach their personal greatness, and success is not predictable by race or any other aspect of student identity. I'll take any questions that you have, and I'm sorry that the connection in here isn't strong enough for the interactive report card to be quite as powerful as I'd like. But yes, Paul.
I just want thank you for sending out the slides ahead of time. I was able to play around a bit with the website, so I didn't listen to you on the 21st. So I just want to kind of explain this to me. I looked at the chronically truant student data per building, and the 5-year trends for all of those. And I mean, for example, last year King was at 5%, and this year it was at 97%. So and the prior trend had been like 5, 6, whatever, but then 97.
Right. So
I'm.
Yeah. Yes. And they actually have still said that their data is not 100% accurate yet. That is one that is not accurate.
Okay.
And I will say that there are two different data points that they're drawing in, and I have a feeling. Well, I've had some discussions 2 weeks ago with people at ISB who are kind of the data analysis people, and from their explanation to me, it sounds like it is essentially a data scrubbing system on their end that is confounding things more than anything else. We also have two different data points that we're talking about there. We're talking about chronic absenteeism and chronic truancy. They're defined differently by the state, and I hope that I can, let's see. So, oh, I don't think they changed this yet either. Yes, no, they did. They did. So this was even wrong earlier. And when I say earlier, I mean earlier in the summer. So chronic absenteeism shows the percentage of students who miss 10% or more of the school days per year with or without a valid excuse. Okay, so that's what I was talking about, and that's one of the new indicators here is chronic absenteeism is new. Okay, chronically truant students is a piece that has been there for a long time, and there's actually you can actually go back in the history of my presentations and see. I believe it was 2013 or 2000. Oh, it would have been 2012. They changed the definition of what it meant to be chronically truant. And yet, when you look at trend line data, it never says anything about where that definition changed. Now, this is one of those pieces. We did not have 26% of our students chronically truant last year. We're still trying to figure out where that data piece is being scrubbed differently by the buildings. But when you say that King had 97% of their students as chronically truant, that's where this data is
messy,
inaccurate. And I will say that we're not the only district that is suffering from that at all.
Okay.
And I'm happy I have reached out a little bit over the last 2 weeks to other superintendents about, hey, who else is seeing the data? Most of it is around issues of either enrollment or absenteeism where people are finding errors. There are also some questions that I have not dug into deeply about dropout rates. Because if you take a look at our graduation rate and compare it to our dropout rate, you can tell that there's some things that don't seem to line up there. So thank you for pointing that out, and that's a very good one. Todd and I have actually talked about that one. He and I sat in on a webinar about 2 weeks ago where they were basically admitting, as they were showing us the data, this data is not correct. And we're like, so, and that wasn't for our district, that was statewide.
So then the difficulty for us then is it makes it more difficult to target our interventions if we're not confident the data is where it needs to be. So it makes it more challenging.
Yes. But it means we dig into our
Our own
local
data,
data more to say we run our own reports rather than rely on this.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. That was a good one to point out before I sent people loose on the website. So thank you for hitting that one.
More board questions?
Just a quick one. Thank you. I've been waiting for this because, I mean, I remember them talking about this last year at the joint conference, and then at the Illini Division dinner that we had. It's so late, I can't remember the lady's name who gave a PowerPoint presentation who explained the generic terms of this. Now you've put our district on that map, so I'm glad to be able to see those numbers. And one of the things that she mentioned during the talk was that for the underperforming schools, they would be receiving monetary help.
Yes.
So my question is, and it was something like 30,000 for the second lowest level maybe, and 100,000, or is that way off?
So they've changed those designations just slightly, and what we were able to determine, and Carol and Todd can help me out on this a little bit, but what we were able to determine is what they're doing is essentially we have 2 lowest performing schools and we have 2 underperforming schools. Instead of having a flat rate, it looks to me like it's more designated as almost like a per pupil. It looks to us from what we're able to see right now, so I don't want to say, don't want this quoted and like guaranteed, but it looks to me like we would have access to roughly,
It was about $290,000.
Thank you. That's what I was going to say, but I wasn't.
For district-wide or?
Yeah.
Well, no,
but it's
targeted
at those 4
two-
schools.
Those 4 schools, but do we get to decide how to divide it up,
Yeah,
or?
we're still figuring that. It's not
Oh, okay.
clear from what they just sent us. We're digging into that a little
I
bit.
think that it's going to be, the
The lion's
majority
share.
of that is going to go to Wiley and Dr. Williams.
Yes.
As
Okay.
the lowest performing schools, and then a smaller percentage of that goes to Urbana Middle School and
Yankee Ridge.
and Yankee Ridge. And those will be, again, we will be working with Illinois Empower very closely, just as we worked with AIR and the Illinois School Improvement Network in years past. IL Empower is the group that is contracted to provide those services. So we'll reach out to them as soon as, again, this data was released less than a week ago. It was
Sure.
released on Wednesday.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to put.
Oh, no. It's a great question.
And then the second part of that question was, do they tell us how to spend it, or are we allowed to use it?
Most likely there will be parameters.
Okay.
So that will be a future board meeting.
Okay.
We will talk about those things. But there will definitely be parameters on how we can spend it. But in the past, I'll just say in the past, there's been flexibility.
And my last question, I swear. Is this also tied in with what I remember hearing about how underperforming schools could be paired with excelling schools within the state who chose to pair up with them, and those excelling schools would receive a reward for doing so, and then the underperforming schools would receive benefit? Is that something that they would propose to our district, and can we talk about that in future?
Yes, and I will say, I've heard that too. I have not seen any, in part because the highest performing schools, right, the exemplary schools, would have just been notified of this as well.
Oh.
So they don't have a list of exemplary schools yet who have agreed to partner or mentor. But my guess is that will be coming out over the next several months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great questions. No, just 3 p.m. I'm going to pass, but I do want to give a shout out. I did do the Tiger Talk before the board meeting, and Joanne reminded me that, and I'm sure a board member will say this, if I don't, the high school musical starts tomorrow and runs Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday night at 7 p.m., and then there's a matinee on Sunday only? Or is there at 2? Sunday at 2, okay.
Sunday at
I thought you were saying there were 2 matinees. I'm like, whoa. No, Sunday at 2, so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at 7, and Sunday at 2. The musical is Urinetown, which if you haven't heard about it, it's a very powerful musical, and it's a very, I will say, just like the last 2 years, it's a intense musical in terms of performance level as well. It's not, I will say, it's not necessarily designed for young kids because of some of the themes that are in it, but it's perfectly appropriate for middle school and up. So
Okay.
that'll be it. I'll leave that.
Any
as my-
board reports? Thank you, Don. Any board reports? Okay.
This is just a reminder to the public that in the spring of 2019, there are 3 board subdistricts which have terms ending. You can go to the Champaign County Clerk's website and to the Urbana School District website and download election information and petitions. You can circulate those petitions between now and December 17th. You can begin to file your nominating petitions starting on December 10th through the 17th. And the subdistricts that will be open are Subdistrict 2, Subdistrict 4, and Subdistrict 6.
And then the other 4 candidates is in 2 more years?
Yes. in
Okay, they'll be
2020.
up.
Yes.
So go out, get your ballots, get them signed, those that are running. Thank you.